The sun hung high in the sky, casting a golden shimmer across the sprawling beachfront resort where the Carter family had finally settled in for a long overdue escape. John Carter, a man hardened by years of navigating perilous missions as an FBI agent, felt the rare sensation of peace wash over him as he stretched out on a cushioned lounge chair by the pool. His sunglasses rested low on his nose, and his simple swim trunks clung lightly to his frame, still damp from an earlier dip. For once, the weight of his badge, the constant hum of danger, and the endless stream of high-stakes decisions faded into the background. Here, surrounded by the rhythmic crash of waves and the chatter of carefree vacationers, he was just a monofather, a husband savoring a fleeting moment of stillness he'd craved for months. Beside him sat Lisa, his wife of 15 years, her presence as steady and grounding as ever. She cradled a novel in her hands, its pages worn and dog-eared from being picked up and abandoned during her relentless schedule. As a celebrated civil rights attorney, dressed in a flowing sundress that caught the breeze, she exuded an effortless grace, though her mind buzzed faintly with the echoes of courtroom arguments and the faces of the marginalized clients she fought tirelessly to defend. Lisa lived for justice, for the voiceless, for those crushed under the heel of systemic inequity. Yet, beneath her composed exterior, she felt the same quiet yearning as Jonto let go, to breathe, to weave new memories with the family she held as her unshakable anchor. This vacation was their sanctuary, a hard-earned pause after months of chaos, and she intended to guard it fiercely. Their children, Max and Emma, darted through the pool like gleeful sprites, their laughter ringing out over the water like a melody. 12-year-old Max, tall for his age with a seriousness that hinted at the man he'd one day become, splashed playfully at his younger sister. His dark hair glistened under the sun, and his competitive streak flared as he challenged Emma to race him to the deep end. Emma, 7 and radiant with boundless energy, paddled after him, her curly brown hair bouncing with every stroke. Her bright, toothy grin lit up the scene, a burst of sunshine amid the chlorinated ripples. The siblings' joy was infectious, their shrieks and giggles weaving a cocoon of warmth around the family. John tilted his head back, letting the sound seep into his bones, a balm for the tension he carried like a second skin. Lisa's gaze drifted from her book to the kids, a soft smile tugging at her lips. For a moment, everything felt right, perfect, even as if the universe had conspired to grant them this slice of bliss. But perfection, as they'd both learned in their lines of work, was a fragile illusion. The air shifted subtly, a ripple of unease threading through the lazy afternoon. John noticed at first a tall figure approaching from the far side of the pool deck, clad in a dark polo shirt that marked him as resort security. The guard moved with a deliberate stride, his broad shoulders squared and his jaw set in a way that radiated authority. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, swept over the crowd before locking onto the Carters with a glint of suspicion. That made John's stomach tighten. He lowered his drink, a chilled glass of lemonade that now felt heavy in his hand, and tracked the man's every step. Years of training had honed his instincts to a razor's edge, and something about this felt off, like the first tremor before an earthquake. Lisa sensed it too. Her book slipped onto her lap as her pulse quickened. A faint from beneath her ribs, she glanced at John, their eyes meeting in a wordless exchange honed by years of partnership. The guard's gaze wasn't welcoming or routine, it was cold, probing, as if he'd already decided they didn't belong in this pristine paradise of wealth and privilege. Her fingers tightened around the armrest of her chair, the cool metal biting into her palm. She hated this feeling, creeping dread that shadowed their every attempt to claim a moment of normalcy. They'd faced it before, sit-along glances in upscale restaurants, curt questions at exclusive venues, the unspoken assumption that their skin color marked them as outsiders. But this time, the weight of it pressed harder, sharper, threatening to fracture the fragile peace they'd built. "Excuse me," the guard's voice cut through the hum of the poolside, firm and devoid of warmth. "I need to verify that you're guests at this resort." He stood a few feet away now, his stance wide and unyielding, his tone carrying an edge that made John's jaw clench. Slowly, John slid his sunglasses down his nose, meeting the man's stare head-on. "I am a guest here," he replied, his voice steady but laced with a quiet fire. Inside, a storm churned memories of countless encounters where his authority, his very existence, had been questioned without cause. He could feel Lisa tense beside him, her breath catching as she set her book aside entirely. The guard's expression didn't soften. "Could you tell me your room number?" he pressed. His words clipped, his courtesy non-existent. John's grip on the edge of his chair tightened, knuckles palling against the strain. "We're in room 305, he said evenly. "We checked in yesterday." The guard gave a curt nod but didn't budge, his hand hovering near the radio clip to his belt. "I'll need to confirm that with the front desk," he replied, his tone implying doubt rather than procedure. John's chest burned with a slow, simmering anger. This wasn't just a routine check, it was a challenge, a public humiliation draped in the guise of protocol. He forced himself to stay calm, to keep his voice level. "You can make a call," he said, a hint of steel creeping in. "We don't need to go anywhere." Lisa rose to her feet, her sundress swaying as she stepped forward, her posture radiating defiance. "We haven't done anything wrong," she said, her voice clear and resolute. "We have every right to be here, just like anyone else." Her heart pounded, but her eyes blazed with the same fire that had won her countless battles in the courtroom. She wouldn't let this moment strip her family of their dignity. Not here, not now, round them. The poolside chatter hushed, heads turning as curiosity morphed into a stifling scrutiny. A few guests pulled out their phones, lenses glinting as they began to record, their whispers buzzing like flies. The weight of their stares pressed down on John, each murmur slicing into him like a shard of glass. He could feel the shift. The crowd wasn't just watching, they were judging, waiting for the scene to erupt into something they could dissect later over cocktails. Max and Emma had stopped splashing, their small figures huddled at the pool's edge. Max clutched his sister's hand, his young face etched with confusion and a flicker of fear. At 12, he was old enough to sense the undercurrent of wrongness, to feel the sting of being singled out. His eyes, wide and glistening, darted between his parents, searching for answers they couldn't yet give. "Why are they doing this to you and Mom?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and helplessness. "You didn't do anything wrong." John's heart twisted, a visceral ache spreading through him. He knelt beside his son, resting a steady hand on his shoulder. "It's just a misunderstanding, Max," he said softly, though the words tasted hollow. "We'll be okay." But doubt gnawed at him. Prejudice didn't vanish with a phone call or a polite explanation. It festered, and he knew this could spiral beyond his control. Emma clung to Max, her curls plastered to her cheeks, her bright smile replaced by a quivering lip. She didn't understand the words or the guard's cold demeanor, but she felt the shift, the way the air thickened, the way her parents' voices tightened. John forced a reassuring smile, his chest aching as he gestured toward the water. "Go play a little more, kids," he said, his tone gentle but strained. "Dad's got this." Max hesitated, his gaze hardening with a defiance that mirrored his mother's. He wanted to stand with them, to shield them, but the powerlessness of his youth held him back. With a reluctant nod, he tugged Emma back toward the pool, though his eyes kept flicking toward his parents. Lisa stood firm, her composure a thin veneer over the fury bubbling beneath. The crowd's scrutiny bore into her, their phones capturing every gesture, every word. She felt exposed, raw, as if her family had been thrust onto a stage they hadn't chosen. The guard's radio crackled as he stepped aside to call the front desk, his voice low but his posture unyielding. Nearby, a woman in a wide-brimmed hat whispered to her companion, her words too soft to catch but her tone dripping with disdain. A man lounging by the bar smirked, sipping his drink as if this were entertainment. These onlookers, with their casual cruelty, deepened the wound strangers who'd never know the Carters' struggles, their triumphs, their humanity. John straightened, his mind racing. He was an FBI agent, a man who'd stared down criminals and dismantled threats to national security. Yet here he was, reduced to proving his right to exist in a space he'd paid for. The irony stung, but more than that, the injustice fueled a quiet rage. This wasn't just about him, it was about Lisa, who'd dedicated her life to dismantling the very systems now ensnaring them. About Max, whose innocence was being chipped away. About Emma, whose joy had been dimmed, The lesson burned clear. Power, when wielded without accountability, corroded everything it touched. Justice wasn't a given, it was a fight, one they'd waged together, no matter how this day unfolded. As the guard awaited confirmation, the Carters stood united, their bond a fortress against the storm. The resort's luxury faded into a hollow backdrop, the true cost of this moment etched in their resolve. Whatever came next, revelation, confrontation, or reckoning, the consequences of this abuse of authority would ripple far beyond the poolside. A testament to the strength required to face it head-on. The sun blazed high above the shimmering poolside, its golden rays bouncing off the water, casting a deceptive glow of serenity over the scene. Yet, beneath this weight of calm, a storm brewed, thick with tension and unspoken accusations. The Carter family stood at the heart of it all, exposed under the relentless scrutiny of a growing crowd. Every step they took, every fleeting glance they exchanged, seemed to ripple outward, drawing sharp whispers and narrowed eyes. Max, the eldest child, clung to his younger sister Emma's hand with a grip so tight his knuckles whitened. Though he was only a boy, the weight of the moment pressed heavily on his small shoulders. He could feel the way the air thickened with judgment, the way the murmurs swelled like a tide threatening to drown them. Beside him, Emma's wide, innocent eyes darted upward to their mother, Lisa. Her voice, soft yet piercing, broke through the hum of the crowd. "Mom, what's happening? Why is that man talking to you and Dad like that?" she asked, her tone trembling with a child's confusion, her tiny brow furrowing as she tried to make sense of the chaos encircling her family. Lisa's heart clenched at the sound of her daughter's voice. She turned to Emma, her face a battlefield of emotions, fear, anger, and a desperate need to shield her children from the ugliness unfolding around them. Forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace, she knelt slightly, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face. "It's nothing, sweetheart," she said, her voice straining to sound steady, though it quivered at the edges. "Just a little mix-up. Everything's going to be fine, I promise." But the words felt hollow even to her own ears, a fragile shield against the reality pressing in. The crowd's stares bore into them like needles, unrelenting and cold. Whispers wove through the onlookers, a chorus of speculation rising from the poolside loungers. A middle-aged woman, her sun hat tilted as she leaned toward her husband, muttered under her breath, "Do you think they even belong here? They don't quite fit, do they?" Her husband nodded faintly, his lips pursed in quiet agreement. Others nearby shook their heads, their faces etched with disapproval, as if the Carter family's mere presence offended some unspoken rule of this pristine retreat. John, standing tall beside Lisa, felt the weight of those judgments settle deep into his bones. His gaze flickered to his children, Max, with his clenched jaw and protective stance, and Emma, clutching her brother's hand as though it were her lifeline. A pang of sorrow stabbed through him, sharp and unforgiving. He knew this moment, however it ended, would leave its mark on them. The accusing eyes, the hushed voice, they were sowing seeds of doubt and shame in his children's hearts, eroding the innocence they deserved to keep. In that instant, a silent vow took root within him. No matter the cost, no matter the fight ahead, he would not let this ordeal define them. He would shield them from the pain of this injustice, even if it meant carrying it all himself. Max and Emma, sensing the storm but unable to grasp its full meaning, turned to their parents with questions burning in their eyes. Yet they said nothing, their small hands locked together in a wordless pact of solidarity, facing the unknown as one. The crowd's murmur grew louder, a restless hum that pulsed through the humid air. Lisa straightened, her chest rising with a deep, steadying breath as she faced the security guard standing before them. His demeanor was icy, his posture rigid, as though he'd already decided their guilt before a single word was spoken. As a lawyer, Lisa was no stranger to confrontation. She'd stood in courtrooms, faced down opponents with sharp tongues and sharper minds, always armed with logic and resolve. But this was different. This wasn't a legal debate or a battle of wits, it was a personal assault, a public shaming of her family rooted in something far uglier than procedure. "We've answered every question you've asked," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. "We've shown you all the proof you need. I don't understand why you're still demanding we leave." She met the guard's gaze head-on, her dark eyes blazing with a quiet fury she could barely contain. The guard shifted slightly, his expression unyielding. Though a faint flicker of unease passed through his eyes, "It's just procedure, ma'am," he replied, his tone flat and rehearsed. "We have to keep the resort secure." The words landed like a slap, and Lisa felt a surge of anger rise within her, hot and fierce. She knew Proceduric knew it better than most. She'd spent years navigating the intricacies of law, defending the vulnerable, dismantling excuses dressed up as policy, and she knew this wasn't about security. It was about prejudice, about the way her family's skin didn't match the sun-bleached faces lounging by the pool, about the unspoken assumptions that branded them outsiders. "If this is procedure," she said, her voice sharpening, each syllable a deliberate strike, "then tell me, does it apply to everyone? Are you stopping every family here, asking them to prove they belong, or is it just us?" The guard faltered, his composure cracking for a fleeting moment. He glanced toward the crowd, where curious onlookers leaned forward, their whispers growing quieter as they watched the exchange unfold. His jaw tightened, and he straightened, doubling down on his stance. "If you're inconvenienced, ma'am, you're welcome to take it up with the manager," he said. His voice clipped, his eyes narrowing with a hint of disdain. Lisa didn't flinch. "Oh, I will," she shot back, her tone unwavering. "But I'll make sure they know exactly what's happening here, how my family is being singled out. Treated like intruders when we're guests just like everyone else. We deserve fairness, not suspicion." John stood at her side, his hand resting lightly on her arm, a silent anchor amidst the rising tide of her fury. He could feel the heat radiating from her, the righteous anger she'd carried into countless battles against injustice. To Lisa, this wasn't just about their family, it was a piece of the larger war she'd fought her whole career. A war against the petty tyrannies of power wielded without cause. He admired her strength, her refusal to bend, but beneath his pride, his own anger simmered. They'd come here for peace, for a fleeting escape from the world's harsh edges, and instead they'd stumbled into a fight they hadn't chosen. At that moment, a second guard approached, younger and brash. His arms crossed over his chest with a swagger that oozed arrogance. He smirked at Lisa, his eyes glinting with mockery. "Ma'am, you need to calm down," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "This is just routine. No one's targeting you. We've had plenty of people sneak in here before, so you can see why we're careful." The words pushed Lisa to her breaking point. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, her presence towering despite her smaller frame. "Careful," she snapped, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. "Your job is to harass people based on nothing but how they look. We've given you everything you asked for, and you still treat us like criminals. This isn't caution, it's discrimination, and I won't let it stand." The crowd fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Some onlookers nodded faintly, their expressions softening with reluctant agreement, while others whispered among themselves, pointing toward the guards and the carters with a mix of intrigue and unease. The younger guard's smirk faltered, his bravado slipping under the intensity of Lisa's glare. But he quickly masked it with a scoff. "If you don't like it, you can leave and wait for the manager," he said, his tone thick with condescension. Lisa's eyes locked onto his, unyielding and fierce. "No," she said, her voice a low, resolute growl. "We're not going anywhere. We have every right to be here, just like anyone else. If you can't prove this procedure applies to everyone, then I know exactly what this is and I'll fight it." The younger guard hesitated, then signaled to his colleague, a subtle gesture that hinted at a call for reinforcement. But Lisa was beyond caring. She stood her ground, a mother and a warrior, determined to protect her family's dignity against the tide of unfairness crashing over them. John squeezed her shoulder, his voice soft but thick with pride. "You're doing great, Lisa," he murmured, his eyes shining with admiration. Yet beneath his calm exterior, a storm ragged danger at the injustice, frustration at their stolen peace, and a fierce resolve to stand by her side. The tension thickened as a group of police officers strode into the pool area, their boots clicking against the tiles with a cold, deliberate rhythm. The crowd hushed, save for a few scattered whispers, their eyes wide with anticipation and simmering outrage. A tall officer, his face carved with stern lines, approached John and Lisa without preamble. "We got a report of a disturbance," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "I need your ID, sir." John remained steady, reaching into his pocket with measured calm. He pulled out his FBI badge, holding it up for the officer to see. "I'm John Carter, FBI agent," he said evenly. "My family and I are guests here. We're not causing any trouble." The officer barely glanced at the badge before sneering, his lip curling with contempt. "I need real ID, not some trinket you picked up at a gift shop." The insult stung, a sharp jab at John's pride, but he forced himself to stay composed, his jaw tightening as he held his ground. Beside him, Lisa's restraint shattered. She stepped forward, her voice ringing out with the authority of a courtroom advocate. "That's an FBI badge," she said, her tone fierce and unyielding. "My husband doesn't need to prove anything more. You're crossing a line making baseless demands, disrespecting us. Do you even realize this is an abuse of power?" The officer ignored her, his focus fixed on John, his hand drifting toward the handcuffs gleaming at his belt. "If you don't have anything else, we'll have to take you in," he said, his voice a challenge. Daring them to resist, the crowd erupted in quiet protests, voices rising in disjointed harmony. A woman near the edge of the pool stood, her face flushed with indignation. "He showed you his badge," she called out. "What more do you want? This isn't how you treat people," others murmured in agreement, their anger coalescing into a palpable force. In that moment, the confrontation transcended the Carter family's personal struggle. It became a mirror reflecting the countless times power had been twisted to punish the innocent, to silence the wronged. John and Lisa stood firm, their resolve unbreakable, not just for their own sake, but for the lesson it carried, that justice demands courage, and the misuse of authority carries a cost that echoes far beyond the moment. The scars it left on Max and Emma, the crowd's shifting sympathies, the guards' faltering confidential bore witness to a truth as old as time. When power oversteps, it plants the seeds of its own reckoning. The clamor of the crowd buzzed like a swarm of restless bees, pulling the officer's attention for a fleeting moment. His brow furrowed in irritation, lips tightening into a thin line, but he stood his ground, unflinching. Round him, voices rose and fell, a chaotic symphony of discontent that grated on his nerves. John, sensing the tension coiling tighter with every passing second, made a choice born of pragmatism rather than surrender. He exhaled slowly, his chest heavy with reluctance, and reached into his back pocket. His fingers brushed the worn leather of his wallet as he pulled it free, sliding out his driver's license with deliberate care. Holding it out to the officer, he kept his voice steady, though a flicker of frustration danced beneath the surface. "Here's my ID," he said, his tone measured but firm. "I hope this settles things so we can move on." The officer snatched the license from John's hand, his movements sharp and dismissive. He barely glanced at it before fixing John with a look of thinly veiled disdain, his eyes narrowing as if John were something distasteful caught under his boot. "Should have handed it over sooner," he snapped, his voice dripping with sarcasm. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the license back at John, letting it flutter carelessly to the ground. The gesture was a calculated insult, and John's jaw clenched as he bent to retrieve it, the tips of his ears burning with suppressed anger. He straightened slowly, brushing the dirt from the card, his mind racing with the urge to respond, but held back by the knowledge of what escalation might cost him. Lisa, standing just a step behind, felt a surge of fury ignite in her chest. Her husband's humiliation was a wound she couldn't bear in silence. She stepped forward, her petite frame radiating a fierce energy that belied her size. Her hazel eyes locked onto the officer's, blazing with a mix of righteous indignation and unshakable resolve. "You have no right at all to treat my husband like some lowlife, just because of whatever biases you're carrying around," she declared, her voice ringing out clear and strong, cutting through the crowd's murmurs like a blade. "We're not here for you to trample over as you please. We're people, not pawns in your little power game." Her words carried the weight of someone who'd spent years honing her courage, and they landed hard, stirring the onlookers into a louder hum of agreement. The crowd's energy shifted, growing bolder. Voices that had been hushed whispers moments before now swelled into shouts of support. For the Carter family. A woman nearby nodded vigorously, her hands clasped tight as she muttered her approval. while a man in a faded baseball cap cupped his hands around his mouth and bellowed, "Leave them, Beth, I've done nothing." The air crackled with a shared sense of outrage, a collective refusal to let the moment pass unchallenged. Another officer, younger and bristling with impatience, pushed his way forward. His face was a mask of irritation, his dark eyes glinting with resentment as they fixed on Lisa. He squared his shoulders, puffing out his chest as if to assert his authority over her defiance. "If you've got a problem, lady, file a complaint later," he said, his tone clipped and hostile. "Right now, we're doing our job, nothing more, nothing less." His words were a challenge, daring her to push back, and the smirk tugging at his lips suggested he expected her to crumble. But Lisa didn't falter. She drew herself up to her full height, her posture unyielding, her gaze piercing through his bravado. As a seasoned lawyer, she'd faced down worse arrogant prosecutors, dismissive judges, clients who thought they could intimidate her into silence. This officer's attitude was nothing new, just another hurdle in a long career spent battling for what was right. She pointed a steady finger at him, her voice dropping into a low, steely register that carried the authority of someone who knew the law inside and out. "And what exactly is your job? Harassing innocent people in broad daylight, humiliating a man in front of his wife and kids because you feel like flexing your badge? Don't think for a second I'll let this slide. I know my rights, and I know yours end where this abuse begins." Her words struck like a thunderclap, igniting the crowd further. People pressed closer, their voices rising in a chorus of support. "She's right," someone yelled from the back. "This is ridiculous, they just wanted a vacation," another added, her voice thick with empathy. A few bystanders whipped out their phones, their screens glowing as they recorded every second of the confrontation, determined to capture the truth in case the officers tried to twist it later. The weight of their scrutiny pressed down on the scene, amplifying the tension until it felt like the air itself might snap. The younger officer, undeterred by the growing unrest, stepped closer to John, his boots scuffing the pavement with purpose. His eyes were cold, unfeeling, locked onto John with a defiance that bordered on personal. "You've got two choices," he said, his voice flat and menacing. "Cooperate fully, or we'll enforce compliance. Your call." The threat hung heavy between them, a dark promise of what might come if John dared to resist. Lisa's heart lurched as she saw the flicker of fear in John's eyes, quickly masked by a steely determination. She moved without thinking, placing herself between her husband and the officer, her body a shield against the looming threat. "We've already cooperated," she said, her voice ringing with a fierce clarity that belied the storm of emotions churning inside her. "My husband showed you his ID and his FBI badge. For God's sake, if you keep pushing this, if you keep threatening us, I swear I'll make sure the whole world knows what you've done here today. I'll drag this into the light, and you'll answer for it under the law you claim to uphold." Her words weren't just a defense, they were a vow, a promise to fight until justice was served. The crowd erupted, cheers and shouts blending into a roar of solidarity. "That's right, hold them accountable," a man called out, his voice rough with anger. A teenage girl near the front waved her phone triumphantly, shouting, "It's all on video." The pressure was mounting, and even the officers couldn't ignore it. Some exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence wavering under the weight of so many eyes. But the younger one stood firm, his jaw set in stubborn defiance. Then an older officer stepped forward, his face carved with stern lines, his hand already reaching for the handcuffs dangling at his belt. He fixed John with a look that brooked no argument. "Mr. Carter, if you don't comply fully, we'll have to restrain you until we verify everything," he said, his tone mechanical, as if this were just another box to check on a routine patrol. There was no hesitation in his voice, no trace of doubt, just the cold certainty of someone who'd done this 100 times before. John's chest tightened as he drew a slow, deliberate breath, fighting to keep his composure. He knew the stakes, any hint of defiance could spiral this into something uglier, something that might scar his family even deeper. His kids, Max and Emma, stood just a few feet away, their small faces pale with shock. Max's wide eyes darted between his father and the officers, confusion and fear warring in his expression, while Emma clung to Lisa's hand, her tiny fingers trembling. John's heart twisted at the sight. The humiliation wasn't just his own, it was theirs too. A shared wound he couldn't shield them from. "I'll cooperate," he said at last, his voice low and taut, each word laced with barely contained rage. He held out his wrists, his movements slow and deliberate, offering them up like a sacrifice to keep the peace. The click of the handcuffs locking around John's wrists echoed in Lisa's ears like a gunshot. She watched, helpless, as the man she loved, the man who'd spent his career protecting others, was reduced to a spectacle, his dignity stripped away in front of their children. Her throat burned with unshed tears, her hands curling into fists at her sides. This wasn't just an injustice, it was personal, a violation of everything they'd built together. "What are you doing?" she cried, her voice breaking with a mix of fury and anguish. "This is how you treat an FBI agent. My husband's done nothing wrong, cooperated every step of the way. This is abuse. Plain and simple, and you know it." The younger officer didn't even flinch. He smirked, his face a blank slate of indifference, refusing to meet her gaze. His silence was a slap, a cruel dismissal that stoked the fire in Lisa's chest until it blazed white-hot. She wanted to scream, to tear into him with every ounce of her legal expertise, but the sight of her children held her back. Max, his lanky frame rigid with tension, stared at his father in handcuffs, his hero suddenly vulnerable in a way he'd never imagined. "Dad, why are they doing this?" he asked, his voice cracking, tears welling in his eyes. "You didn't do anything wrong." John turned to his son, his expression softening despite the storm raging inside him. He forced a calm he didn't feel, desperate to ease the fear etched across Max's face. "It's okay, buddy," he said gently. "It's just a misunderstanding. We'll sort it out." But the lie tasted bitter on his tongue. He knew this wasn't a simple mix-up, it was a lesson in power and prejudice, one his son would carry long after the cuffs came off. Emma, barely 7, pressed herself against her mother's side, her small body quaking with sobs she couldn't hold back. She looked up at Lisa, her voice a fragile whisper. "Mommy, are they going to hurt Daddy? Why are they being so mean?" Lisa knelt beside her, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace, her fingers threading through Emma's soft curls. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart," she murmured, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay strong. "We're together, and we'll get through this. I promise." But inside, she was breaking, her fury warring with a mother's instinct to protect her children from the ugliness unfolding before them. For John, the moment dredged up memories of late-night talks with his black colleagues at the F stories of being stopped, questioned, judged for no reason beyond the color of their skin. He'd listened, sympathized, even vowed to fight that kind of bias from within the system. But now, with the cold metal biting into his wrists, he understood their pain in a way he never had before. His badge, his service, his sacrifice and own of it had shielded him from this. The officer tightened the cuffs with a rough yank, and John winced, the sting a sharp reminder of his powerlessness. Lisa's voice cut through the haze again, sharp and unyielding. "You're doing this in front of our kids, sir. Kids, is this your idea of justice? All we wanted was a quiet family vacation, and you've turned it into a nightmare. How do you sleep at night enforcing the law like this?" Her words reverberated across the poolside, drawing more head sunburned tourists, hotel staff, a gray-haired man in a Hawaiian shirt who shouted, "Let him go's done nothing." The crowd's support was a lifeline, a swell of humanity pushing back against the officer's cold authority. John's anger simmered, a slow burn he fought to control. He wanted to lash out, to demand the respect he'd earned, but he couldn't risk his family's safety. Lisa, though, had no such restraint left. Tears glistened in her eyes, but her resolve was ironclad as she faced the younger officer head-on. "Do you think you can treat us like this and walk away unscathed? I'm a lawyer, know the law better than you ever will. This won't stay buried. I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done here today." Her voice was a weapon, honed by years of courtroom battles, and it struck with precision. The crowd rallied louder, their phones held high, a forest of lenses capturing every angle. The older man in the Hawaiian shirt stepped closer, his weathered face creased with indignation. "You ought to be ashamed," he growled at the officers. "This family's just trying to enjoy their day." A woman in a sundress nodded fiercely, her toddler balanced on her hip as she filmed. The pressure was palpable, a tide turning against the officer's arrogance. John caught Lisa's eye, and in that shared glance, he felt a surge of pride and unity. They weren't just husband and wife. Parents to Max and Emma were partners in a fight bigger than themselves. This wasn't just their story. It was the story of countless others who'd faced the same abuse, the same disregard. And as the young officer faltered, his bravado cracking under Lisa's unrelenting stare, John knew they wouldn't let this end in silence. Justice wasn't just a word, it was a promise, one they'd keep no matter the cost. The lesson was clear: power unchecked breeds cruelty, but courage, even in the face of cuffs and sneers, could light the way to something better. The air hung heavy with tension, thick and palpable, as the young officer stood before Lisa, his face a mask of indifference that barely concealed his unease. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job," he said, his voice flat and mechanical, devoid of warmth or empathy, as though the words had been rehearsed 1,000 times. "If you've got a problem with how we're handling this, feel free to file a complaint." His tone carried a faint edge of defiance, a subtle dare that suggested he doubted she'd follow through. But Lisa Carter was no ordinary woman to be brushed aside by cold bureaucracy. She straightened her spine, her posture radiating defiance, her dark eyes locking onto his with an intensity that could have burned through steel. The faint hum of the gathered crowd faded into the background as she took a steadying breath, her resolve hardening like iron. "File a complaint," she echoed, her voice rising with a firmness that cut through the stifling silence. "Do you honestly believe a piece of paper will undo the damage you've caused? That it will erase this shameless abuse of power?" She paused, letting her words settle, her gaze never wavering. "I'm a lawyer. I've spent years studying the law, defending it, believing in it. What you're doing here isn't just a violation, it's a mockery of justice, a stain on everything it stands for. You can hide behind your procedures and protocols all you want, but the truth is glaringly obvious to everyone here." Her voice rang out, clear and commanding, a beacon slicing through the fog of tension that enveloped them. It was a call to arms, and the crowd felt it. Whispers stirred among the onlookers, their initial curiosity morphing into something sharper, a simmering outrage that mirrored the fire in Lisa's chest. She pressed on, undeterred, her words growing sharper, more piercing. "I'm sick of the excuses. My husband, John, showed you his federal ID. He complied with every demand you made. He did nothing to deserve this treatment. And yet you've dragged him away in handcuffs like a criminal, in front of our children, no less. Do you have any idea what that does to a family, to a man's dignity?" Her voice trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the raw fury and pain coursing through her. "This isn't just a mistake. It's a deliberate abuse of power, and I promise you, I will not let it slide. You will answer for this." The young officer shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado faltering under the weight of her accusations. His eyes darted to the side, avoiding her unrelenting stare, as if searching for an escape from the storm she'd unleashed. But there was no hiding from Lisa's wrath. The crowd, once a passive assembly of strangers, began to ripple with energy. An older man with a weathered face and a voice roughened by years of hard living called out from the back, "She's right. This is abuse, plain and simple." Nearby, a woman with a toddler clinging to her leg nodded fiercely, her own anger spilling over. "Leave them alone. They're a family. They've done nothing wrong." The air crackled with their shared indignation, a chorus of voices rising to bolster Lisa's stand. From the edge of the scene, an older officer watched with a furrowed brow, his silver hair catching the faint sunlight filtering through the trees. He'd been silent until now, observing the confrontation unfold with a growing sense of unease. Experience had taught him the dangers of letting a situation like this spiral too far. Stepping forward, he raised a hand in a gesture meant to calm the storm. "Ma'am," he began, his voice softer than his colleagues, tinged with a practiced diplomacy. "We understand this has been inconvenient for your family. We'll look into an internal investigation. You have my word. Let's try to resolve this peacefully." "All right." His attempt at conciliation hung in the air, fragile and unconvincing. Lisa's eyes narrowed, her gaze slicing through his words like a blade through tissue paper. "An internal investigation," she repeated, her tone dripping with bitter irony. I've heard that line too many times in my career. It's the same tired promise trotted out to sweep things under the rug. Do you think I'm naive enough to trust vague assurances? That I'll just nod and walk away while you protect your own? She stepped closer, her presence towering despite her modest height, her voice low and fierce. I won't let you bury this. You've humiliated my husband, terrified my children, and trampled on everything I hold dear. I'll make sure the truth comes out, every ugly detail, and I won't stop until you're held accountable. Her words ignited the crowd further. Cheers erupted, sporadic at first, then swelling into a roar of support. This family deserves justice, a burly man shouted, his fists clenched as if ready to fight alongside her. Another voice, a woman's this time, chimed in. We're with you, Lisa. This isn't right. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence eroding under the mounting pressure. The younger one, who'd handcuffed John with such casual authority, now looked like a deer caught in headlights, his hands fidgeting nervously at his sides. But Lisa wasn't finished. She took another step forward, her voice a thunderclap in the charged silence. You can't hide behind your badges or your so-called procedures. Justice doesn't bend to excuses, and neither will I. At that moment, John stood a few feet away, wrists still bound, his broad shoulders squared despite the indignity forced upon him. His dark eyes met Lisa's, and in them burned a quiet pride, a deep love that needed no words. He'd always known his wife was a forcey, a brilliant mind, a fierce heart, but seeing her now, standing tall against this injustice, filled him with a gratitude that steadied his shaking hands. She wasn't just fighting for him, she was fighting for their family, for their children's future, for every soul who'd ever been wronged by those sworn to protect. The older officer, sensing the crowd's hostility growing like a tidal wave, lowered his voice, desperation creeping into his tone. Ma'am, we regret this has escalated. We'll report it to our superiors, make sure it's handled properly. Please, let's de-escalate this. But Lisa wasn't swayed by his platitudes. She knew apologies were hollow without action, that justice demanded more than whispered regrets. She turned to the crowd, drawing strength from their faces, ordinary people, strangers united by her words, and then back to the officer, her resolve unshakable. If you mean that, release my husband right now. That's the bare minimum you owe us. A sign you're willing to admit your mistake. The older officer hesitated, his jaw tightening, but the weight of the crowd's eyes bore down on him. With a reluctant nod, he signaled to his colleague. The younger officer fumbled with the cuffs, his hands trembling as the metal clicked open. The sound reverberated through the silence, a small victory in a war far from won. John flexed his wrists, the red marks a silent testament to the ordeal, and stepped toward Lisa. Their hands found each other, fingers interlocking in a grip that spoke of resilience and unity. The crowd erupted again, applause and cheers rolling over them like a wave, some shouting, "That's right, free the man, and justice for the Carters." Lisa stood taller, her presence transformed. She was no longer just a wife or a mother, she was a symbol, a voice for the voiceless, a warrior against the corrosion of power. As the officers began to retreat, she called after them, her voice cutting through the din. "You'll hear from my lawyer, and don't think for a second that silence will shield you. Justice has a way of finding those who abuse it, and I'll make sure it does." The commotion lingered, a restless hum in the air, until a police cruiser rolled up near the pool area, its tires crunching over gravel. Out stepped Deputy Chief Jensen, a middle-aged man with a stern face and a uniform so crisp it seemed to demand respect. His gray eyes swept the scene, disapproval etched into every line of his expression. He strode toward the cluster of officers, his posture rigid with authority, and Lisa felt a flicker of hope, or perhaps defiance, stir within her. This was her chance to push further, to ensure this wouldn't be buried in some forgotten file. Jensen's gaze flicked to the officers first, a sharp, silent reprimand, before settling on Lisa and John. "Mrs. Carter, Mr. Carter," he said, his voice measured but tinged with a distant formality that felt rehearsed. "I understand your family's been through an unfortunate situation. We apologize for the inconvenience. We'll conduct an internal investigation to get to the bottom of this." His words were polite, but they lacked soul, a bureaucratic script meant to placate. Lisa's eyes narrowed, her grip on John's hand tightening. An internal investigation, she shot back, her voice slicing through his calm facade. You think a cursory glance at your own mess will fix this? My husband was handcuffed in front of our children, for no reason. We were treated like threats, like outsiders, all because of how we look. Is that your idea of justice? Her words carried a weight that made Jensen shift slightly, his composure cracking under her scrutiny. He cleared his throat, clinging to his authority. Mum, I assure you, we'll review this thoroughly. If there's misconduct, we'll address it. You're welcome to file a complaint. Well, take it seriously. But Lisa wasn't here for promises that dissolved like mist. She stepped closer, her voice steady and unyielding. I'm done with empty words, Deputy Chief Jensen. I want specifics. What steps will you take? Who's overseeing this? When will it happen? If I don't get answers, I'll take this to the media. The world deserves to know how your officers treated my family. Jensen's jaw tightened, but he forced a conciliatory tone. Mrs. Carter, I get your frustration. We'll conduct a full investigation, make the results public. I'll oversee it myself. If there's abuse of power, those responsible will face consequences under the law. His words were firmer now, but Lisa met his gaze without flinching, searching for sincerity. I'll hold you to that, she said. But if I see no progress, or if you try to bury this, I won't hesitate to shine a spotlight on it. My family deserves respect. My children deserve justice. And I'll fight until they get it. The crowd's support swelled again, voices rising in a defiant chorus. She's right, this family deserves better, a man bellowed. A woman nearby added, we won't let this slide. Jensen nodded, a reluctant acknowledgement of the pressure bearing down on him. We'll keep you informed. Mrs. Carter, this will be transparent. The tension didn't break, but it shifted, a fragile truce hanging in the balance. Lisa turned to John, their eyes locking in a shared understanding. He squeezed her hand, pride and gratitude radiating from him. She wasn't just his wife, she was his champion, their family's shield. And as the crowd rallied behind them, Lisa knew this fight was bigger than them alone. It was for every family wronged, every voice silenced. Her resolve deepened, a fire that wouldn't fade until justice was more than a word, until it was a reckoning for those who dared to abuse it. The air hung heavy with unspoken tension as Jensen, the deputy chief, turned his back and strode away, his boots clicking against the pavement in a rhythm that echoed finality. Yet, for the Carter family, the weight of isolation that had once crushed their spirits began to lift, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of hope. Around them, a crowd of strangers' faces they'd never known until this moment gathered close, their eyes shimmering with empathy and quiet encouragement. These weren't just onlookers, they were witnesses to a shared struggle, their presence weaving a tapestry of solidarity that wrapped the Carters in its warmth. John's grip tightened around Lisa's hand, his knuckles whitening as a fire of resolve blazed in his chest. This fight, he realized, had grown far beyond the personal injustice they'd suffer at. It had become a beacon for anyone who'd ever been dismissed, degraded, or despised simply for existing as they were. John Carter, a seasoned FBI agent, stood tall in the midst of the swelling crowd, his broad shoulders squared against the storm he knew was coming. His mind churned with memories of countless investigations, gritty interrogations in dimly lit rooms, high-stakes chases through rain-slicked streets, moments where he'd stared down the barrel of danger to defend the fragile ideal of justice. This time, though, the stakes pierced deeper. It wasn't just the faceless public he was fighting for, it was his own flesh and blood, his wife and children, whose dignity had been trampled under the boots of unchecked power. That made his determination burn hotter, a steady flame that refused to flicker. We won't let this go, he declared, his voice cutting through the murmurs around them like a blade, steady yet trembling with the weight of his conviction. I've got every ounce of knowledge, every hard-earned skill from years in the field, and I'll pour it all into dragging the truth into the light. I've faced worse than this, far worse. This time won't break me. Lisa's heart swelled as she watched her husband, pride surging through her like a tidal wave. She knew John's tenacity, had seen it in the way he'd tackled impossible cases and emerged unbroken. That strength now fueled her own resolve, sharpening it to a razor's edge. As a lawyer who'd spent years navigating the labyrinth of legal battles, She was no stranger to the fight. Her mind raced with strategy escons she could call, precedents she could wield, loopholes she could exploit. This wasn't just about her family anymore. It was about every soul who'd been crushed by the same heavy hand of prejudice. "We're not just standing up for ourselves," she said, her voice ringing out with a clarity that silenced the crowd, each word laced with unshakable determination. "We're fighting so no one black, white, or anything in between has to endure this again. It's time the world hears loud and clear, injustice stops here." Her words struck like a match, igniting a spark in the hearts around her. Hands clapped, voices cheered, a wave of applause rolling through the gathering, not just for the Carters, but for the stand they'd taken against a tide of discrimination that had drowned too many for too long. Among the crowd stood an elderly man, his weathered hands trembling as he raised them to cup around his mouth. "This family's right," he shouted, his voice cracking with age but booming with conviction. "We've got to stand together, or this suffering will never end." His gray eyes, clouded with years of witnessing the world's cruelties, locked onto the Carters with a fierce pride, as if they were the children he'd never had, carrying a torch he'd long hoped to see lit. Beside John and Lisa, their children, Max and Emma, stood with wide eyes that gleamed with a mix of awe and trust. Though young, they grasped the gravity of their parents' mission. Max, his small jaw set with a determination that mirrored his father's, squeezed John's hand tighter, his fingers digging in as if anchoring himself to this moment. "We're not going to stay quiet, are we, Dad?" he asked, his voice quivering with a courage that belied his age. John knelt down, his knees pressing into the cold ground, and met his son's gaze with a smile that radiated both love and pride. "No, son," he said softly, his throat tight with emotion. "We're standing up for justice, for those who've never had a voice." Lisa drew Emma close, her arms wrapping around her daughter like a shield against the world's harshness. She gazed into Emma's bright, innocent eyes, her heart aching with a fierce, protective love. "We're doing this for more than just us, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's for everyone out there who's been hurt like we have. This is something our family will never abandon." For the Carters, this battle was no longer just about reclaiming their dignity. It was about forging a legacy of courage, a clarion call that echoed through the crowd and beyond, demanding unity against the shadows of unfairness. The spark of their defiance had been fanned into a wildfire. When a video of their mistreatment at the resort hit the internet, it spread with ferocious speed, leaping from screen to screen as thousands shared the footage within hours. The grainy images captured the raw brutality of the officers' actions, their voices dripping with arrogance as they wielded their authority like a club. Social media erupted in a storm of outrage, hashtags flaring like battle cries, "Justice for the Carters," "End abuse." Strangers poured out their anger and support, their words a lifeline that reached the Carters in their darkest hour. John sat at the kitchen table late that night, the glow of his laptop illuminating his tired features as he scrolled through the flood of messages. Surprise mingled with gratitude in his chest hesitated to go public, fearing it might paint a target on his family's back. But now, seeing this tidal wave of solidarity, he knew he'd chosen right. Lisa, curled up beside him on the couch, couldn't stem the tears that spilled down her cheeks as she read the comments. Stories poured in heart-wrenching tales from people who'd faced the same indignities, their voices joining hers in a chorus of shared pain. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt the suffocating loneliness ebb away, replaced by a fragile reassurance that they weren't alone in this fight. The video didn't just rip like roared, seizing the attention of major news outlets. Television screens flickered with the Carters' story. Newspapers splashed their faces across front pages, and online platforms dissected every frame. Human rights advocates stepped into the spotlight, their voices sharp and unwavering as they declared the officers' actions a symptom of a deeper rota systemic failure that demanded reckoning. A prominent attorney, her silver hair glinting under studio lights, leaned into the microphone during an interview. "This isn't just one bad apple," she said, her tone grave. "It's a textbook case of power run amok. The Carters are every family, every person who's been wronged. We can't let this fade without action." The groundswell of public fury forced the police department's hand. Deputy Chief Jensen stood before a bristling wall of cameras and microphones, his jaw tight, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead despite the cool air. Flanked by other brass, he read from a prepared statement, his voice flat but strained. "We're committed to a full, transparent investigation into the Carter incident," he said, his eyes darting to the sea of skeptical reporters. "We owe it to every citizen to ensure fairness and respect." But the crowd wasn't appeased by hollow words. They wanted blood, or at least accountability. The pressure bore down like a hammer, cracking open the department's defenses. Within weeks, new policies emerged: stricter oversight on authority, mandatory training in fairness and humanity, a desperate bid to stem the tide of abuses. The investigation moved swiftly, unearthing damning evidence, body cam footage, witness accounts, a paper trail of arrogance and prejudice. The officers involved were suspended, their badges stripped away as charges of misconduct and discrimination loomed over them. Like storm clouds, the community exhaled, a collective sigh of relief tinged with lingering unease. Justice had notched a small victory, but the questions it unearthed gnawed at them. How deep did this corruption run? What flaws in recruitment, in training, had let this happen? For the Carters, the aftermath was a jagged landscape of emotions. Lisa sat on the edge of her bed one night, her face buried in her hands as sobs racked her frame. The memory of her children's wide, frightened eyes as the officers barked orders haunted her. How could she shield them from a world that had betrayed them so cruelly? She feared the scars this left on their young hearts, the erosion of trust in those meant to protect. John, pacing the living room, wrestled with his own demons. Anger simmered beneath his calm exterior, a slow boil fed by years of believing in the lonely to see it turn against his own. He punched the wall once, the thud echoing through the quiet house, a release for the frustration he couldn't voice. Outside the police headquarters, small protests bloomed like wildflowers through cracked pavement. Signs waved in the breeze: justice for the Carters, hold them accountable, carried by a motley crew of young firebrands and grizzled activists, their voices rising in unison. An older woman, her hair a shock of white, stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands clutching a photo of her own son, lost to a similar injustice years ago. Her presence lent a quiet gravitas, a reminder of the stakes. The Carters' ordeal had become a lightning rod, a symbol that pierced the veil of complacency and demanded change, not just fleeting fixes, but a seismic shift in the bones of the system. The trial of the officers was a spectacle, the courtroom packed to the rafters with supporters, journalists, and those who'd tasted the bitter gall of discrimination themselves. Light streamed through high windows, bathing the room in a stark glow that sharpened every expression, hope warring with tension, exhaustion etched into every line. John and Lisa sat at the front, their hands locked together, a lifeline against the storm they'd weathered to reach this day. Max and Emma flanked them, their small frames straight-backed, absorbing the weight of what unfolded. The air thrummed with anticipation as testimony unfolded, each word a brick in the wall of truth they'd fought to build. For the Carters, this wasn't just about punishment, it was about a lesson carved in stone, that power, when abused, reaps consequences, and justice, though slow, can rise like the dawn. They'd become more than victims, they were a voice for the silenced, a spark for a fairer world. Their resolve a testament to the enduring fight against the shadows of inequity. The struggle of the Carter family wasn't just their own private wear, it reverberated far beyond the walls of their home, standing as a blazing emblem for every soul who'd ever tasted the bitter sting of injustice because of their skin. In the courtroom, a hushed tension hung heavy in the air, thick with anticipation and the weight of history. Prosecutors stepped forward one by one, their voices steady but laced with urgency, unveiling a cascade of evidence before the judge and jury. On a towering screen that dominated the room, a video flickered to life, its grainy frames exposing the raw brutality of an officer's unchecked power. Each blow landed on innocent bodies seemed to echo through the silence, every barked order slicing through the stillness, every wide-eyed, terrified face searing itself into the minds of those watching. The atmosphere grew denser, more solemn with every passing second, as if the room itself mourned the betrayal of trust. Anger simmered beneath the surface, uncontainable for some. A few spectators clenched their fists, their jaws tight, while others bowed their heads, tears pooling in their eyes like silent prayers. For them, this wasn't just a trial, it was a mirror reflecting their own buried memories of prejudice. Moments when they'd stood powerless against a world that refused to hear them. Lisa Carter sat motionless among them, her gaze fixed on the screen, tears welling up until they blurred the horrifying scenes unfolding before her. Her heart ached not only for her own family's wounds, but for the countless others who'd lived under the same shadow of fear, their voices smothered by a system that should have shielded them. Beside her, John's hands balled into fists, his knuckles whitening under the strain. His chest tightened with a mix of dread and determination. This was their moment, their one shot to peel back the veil and let the world see the agony his people had endured for far too long. The witnesses who'd been at the resort that fateful day took the stand, their voices ringing out with unshakable clarity despite the weight of what they'd seen. An older man, his hair streaked with silver, stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the edge of the podium. His voice quivered at first, but it grew firm, resolute, as he painted a vivid picture of his helplessness, a bystander forced to watch as power twisted into cruelty, stripped of any trace of justice. His words cut deep, raw and unpolished, striking the listeners like a hammer against stone. Tears glistened on the cheeks of those in the gallery, their quiet sobs punctuating his testimony. This wasn't just a recounting of events, it was a cry from the soul, a plea for the world to finally listen. The defense attorneys, tasked with shielding the officers, rose to weave their counterargument. They spoke of job stress, of split-second decisions gone awry, their voices smooth but hollow against the damning footage still lingering in everyone's minds. Their excuses fell flat, crumbling under the weight of truth, unable to sway a single heart in that room. John's eyes burned with a fury tempered by exhaustion, while Lisa's brimmed with a disappointment so profound it seemed to age her in an instant. To them, and to the others who'd known discrimination's cold touch, this trial was no mere legal proceeding, it was a reckoning, a thunderous demand for a system rotten with inequity to be torn down and rebuilt. Days stretched into a grueling marathon of arguments, evidence piling higher with each session until it seemed the courtroom walls themselves might buckle under the pressure. On the final day, a stillness settled over the room, so absolute that every shallow breath seemed to ripple through the silence. The judge's voice broke through, steady and commanding. "We, the jury, find the defendants guilty of abuse of power and inflicting harm on innocent civilians." The words landed like a gavel strike, reverberating through the space. For the officers, it meant a steep fall. Severe punishment loomed ahead, a consequence they could not escape. But for John and Lisa, it was more than a personal triumph. It was a clarion call that justice, however delayed, could still prevail. Relief flooded through them, mingling with a fierce pride. They'd fought not just for themselves, but for every muted voice, drowned by oppression. As they rose to leave, the courtroom buzzed with quiet gestures of respect. Strangers offered tentative smiles, their nods heavy with admiration for the Carters' relentless stand. Outside, the courthouse steps teemed with a swelling crowd, alive with a shared fire. Signs waved high above their heads, bold letters proclaiming justice and equality, while some in the throng embraced, tears streaking their faces as they grinned with fragile hope. An elderly woman, her frail frame wrapped in a faded coat, shuffled toward Lisa. Her eyes sparkled with gratitude as she clasped Lisa's hand, her voice soft but firm. "Thank you for not giving up. Because of you, we see a light ahead." Lisa squeezed her hand back, a lump rising in her throat, overwhelmed by the unspoken bond forged through years of resilience. Their children stood close, basking in the glow of their parents' courage. Max, their eldest son, gripped his mother's hand tightly, his teenage frame standing taller as he scanned the supportive faces around them. For him, this wasn't just a victory, it was a lesson carved into his bones, a legacy of bravery he'd carry into manhood. John's gaze swept over the crowd, locking eyes with those who'd walked the same jagged path of racial bias. His heart thudded with a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just a father anymore, he was a soldier in a greater war. A young man broke through the throng, his face alight with reverence. "Thank you, sir, for fighting for us all," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Because of you, we believe justice isn't just a dream." John nodded, tears pricking his eyes as the weight of their shared strength washed over him. Journalists swarmed nearby, their cameras flashing like lightning. Microphones thrust forward to capture the moment. One approached Lisa, her notepad poised. "What are your thoughts after the verdict?" she asked. Lisa's smile was steady, her voice ringing clear. "I hope today is the first step toward a fairer world, not just for us, but for everyone who's suffered under injustice." She turned to the camera, her words a beacon for those watching at home, igniting a surge of collective resolve. The air thrummed with energy, a tide of empowerment rising among those who'd once borne discrimination and silence. This wasn't the Carters' fight alone anymore. It had swelled into a movement, a vow etched in every heart to never again let injustice go unchallenged. As the family stepped away from the courthouse, the evening sun dipped low, casting a golden warmth over the road ahead. Their future was uncertain, but their resolve was ironclad. They'd never bow to unfairness again. Each step they took rang with conviction, fueled by faith in a fragile but fierce hope. This trial had become a cornerstone, not just for them but for an entire community poised on the edge of change, a chapter defined by justice, equality, and the promise of something better. In the weeks that followed, life resumed its rhythm, though it was irrevocably altered. John returned to his role as an FBI agent, but the badge on his chest carried a deeper weight now. Every case he took on pulsed with meaning. Wasn't just upholding the law. He was guarding the dignity of those like his family, those who'd been trampled by power's misuse. When he encountered echoes of bias or corruption, a fire flared within him, as if he were still fighting for his own kin. Lisa, too, stepped back into her work as a lawyer, but with a sharper focus. She wielded her expertise like a sword, cutting through the tangles of a flawed system to lift up the voiceless. Case after case, she championed the downtrodden, her name growing into a whisper of hope among those battered by prejudice. Their children, Max and Emma, felt the ripples too. At school, the sit-along glances of doubt had faded, replaced by a quiet respect from peers and teachers alike. Max, now teetering on the cusp of adulthood, began to grasp the gravity of standing firm for what's right, his young mind shaping itself around the ideals his parents had lived. Emma, still a child in many ways, absorbed lessons of courage and loyalty, her small hands ready to defend those she loved. Beyond their home, the Carters poured themselves into advocacy, lending their voices to causes that uplifted the marginalized. They spoke at gatherings, their story a spark that lit fires in others, urging them to rise and demand fairness. Though their daily lives ticked on, the Carters never let the lessons of their battle fade. They lived with a gratitude forged in hardship, a unity tempered by struggle, and a determination that refused to dim. What they'd endured hadn't just scarred them, it had sculpted them into a force for change. A family whose story rippled outward, inspiring a world where justice wasn't a privilege but a right. Through their courage, they didn't just reclaim their own peace, they laid the groundwork for a community bound by resilience, ready to fight as one for a future worth believing in. And in that truth, the officers' reckoning stood as a stark reminder. Power abused would meet its end, and justice, though slow, would always find its way. It was nearing 11:30 p.m., and the night clung to the streets like a heavy shroud as James Thompson guided his dark blue Toyota Camry through the pristine, tree-lined roads of an affluent neighborhood. His hands, steady yet tense, gripped the steering wheel with a quiet determination, knuckles faintly whitening under the strain. He kept his speed deliberately slow, adhering meticulously to the posted limit. Every movement calculated. This wasn't just caution, it was survival. In this wealthy, predominantly white enclave, where manicured lawns glowed under soft porch lights and luxury cars gleamed in driveways, a black man driving alone at night was an anomaly that could ignite suspicion. Faster than a struck match, James knew this all too well. His breath was shallow, his chest tight with anticipation. As he glanced into the rearview mirror and saw what he'd been bracing for, the sudden flare of red and blue lights slicing through the darkness behind him. With a slow, measured exhale, he eased the car to the curb, parking directly beneath the harsh glow of a towering street lamp. The choice was intentional. Light was his ally tonight, a silent witness to whatever might unfold. His pulse quickened, a rapid thud against his ribcage, but his face betrayed none of it. He schooled his features into a mask of calm, eyes steady, lips pressed into a neutral line as he watched two figures emerge from the patrol car. Officer Ryan Collins, a weary young man with the eager gait of someone only 3 years into the job, approached the driver's side. His partner, Mike Brennan, a broader, weathered veteran with a perpetual scowl etched into his features, circled toward the passenger window. Both men moved with hands hovering near their holsters, a detail that struck James like a jolt of electricity. He noted it, filed it away, his mind already racing through the possibilities of the next few minutes. "License and registration, please," Collins said, his voice clipped, but not yet hostile. He flicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the dim interior of the Camry. It swept across James's face, lingering for a moment on his sharp cheekbones and dark, unflinching eyes before dropping to his hands, still positioned deliberately at 10 and 2 on the wheel. James met the officer's gaze, his own voice emerging smooth and composed, each word chosen with care. "May I ask why I was pulled over, officer?" The question hung in the air, polite but firm, his enunciation crisp and formal. Collins blinked, momentarily thrown by the unexpected polish in James's tone, as if he'd anticipated slurred defiance or nervous stammering instead. "We've had reports of suspicious activity around here," Collins replied, his voice softening just a fraction, though his posture remained rigid. "Your vehicle was moving unusually slowly." James nodded, his expression unchanging. "I see. I was being careful to follow the speed limit." He shifted slightly, his right hand inching toward his jacket pocket with glacial slowness. "I'm going to reach for my wallet now, if that's all right." The announcement was deliberate, a verbal shield against any sudden misinterpretation. Both officers' flashlights snapped to his hand, beams converging like spotlights on a stage. The air thickened with tension, a palpable current that James could feel pressing against his skin as he extracted his wallet, with the precision of a surgeon. But instead of flipping it open to reveal his ID, he set it gently on the dashboard, the soft thud echoing in the silence. Collins's brow furrowed, a flicker of impatience crossing his youthful face. "Sir, I asked for your license and registration." His tone sharpened, frustration seeping through the cracks. James inclined his head, unruffled. "Before I provide those, I'd like to know if your body cameras are active, officers." The question landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward. Collins and Brennan exchanged a quick, uneasy glance, their rhythm disrupted. This wasn't the usual script. Drivers didn't ask about cameras, not with such calm authority. "Our cameras are always on during stops, sir," Brennan barked from the passenger side, his gruff voice cutting through the night. "Now, please provide your identification." James reached for the wallet again, his fingers brushing the leather with deliberate care. He opened it slowly, then paused, his gaze lifting to meet theirs. "Officers, I want to be fully transparent. I'm about to explain something that might seem unusual, but I ask for your patience." Collins's hand twitched closer to his weapon, his patience fraying. "Sir, stop stalling and show us your ID now." James didn't flinch. "I understand your concern," he said, his voice a steady anchor in the rising storm. "But I'm currently involved in a situation that requires discretion. I can prove my identity, though I'd prefer to do so at the station if necessary." The words ignited a spark of alarm in both officers. Collins took a half step back, his stance shifting to something more defensive, while Brennan's eyes narrowed, suspicion hardening his features. "Step out of the vehicle, sir," Collins ordered, his tone now edged with steel. James complied without hesitation, his movements fluid and unhurried. He unbuckled his seatbelt, the faint click reverberating in the stillness, and pushed the door open. As he rose to his full height, 6 feet of poised, commanding presence, the officer's initial assumptions began to crumble. He wore a tailored dark sweater over crisp dress pants, his polished shoes catching the street lamp's light with a subtle gleam. This wasn't the profile they'd expected, and the mismatch gnawed at them. "Place your hands on the hood of the car," Collins instructed, his voice tight. Brennan moved to flank him, his boots scuffing the pavement as he positioned himself for backup. James obeyed, palms pressing against the cool metal, but his voice cut through again. Clear and resolute. "Officers, I want to be clear that I'm cooperating fully. However, I need to maintain certain confidentiality at this time. I'm not refusing to identify myself. I'm simply requesting to do so through proper channels." His composure was unnerving, a stark contrast to the chaos they were used to shouting drunks, trembling kids, furious executives. James didn't fit. He was an enigma, and it rattled them. "We've had burglaries reported in this area," Brennan growled, his patience long gone as Collins began a brisk pat-down. "And you're acting very suspicious, sir." James's response was calm, almost serene. "I understand how this appears, and I respect that you're doing your job. I simply ask that you respect that I have my reasons for discretion." The search turned up no weapons, just an expensive phone and a slim, official-looking ID card in his pocket. When Collins reached for it, James's hand moved swiftly, but politely to intercept. "I'd prefer you not examine that just yet," he said, his tone unwavering. That was the breaking point. "Turn around," Collins snapped, his frustration boiling over. "You're under arrest for obstruction and suspicious activity." The handcuffs clicked shut around James's wrists, the cold metal biting into his skin. But his expression didn't falter. A faint, almost imperceptible smile curved his lips, as if the night were unfolding exactly as he'd scripted it. The back of the patrol car was frigid, the vinyl seat creaking under his weight. But James settled in with the ease of a man reclining in a leather armchair. Through the rearview mirror, Collins and Brennan stole glances at him, their confusion mounting. Most arrestees raged or cowarejums did neither. He was a puzzle they couldn't solve. "Run the car's registration again," Collins muttered to Brennan as they pulled onto the road. The station's still miles away. The initial check had linked the Camry to Marshall Industries, a name that meant nothing to them. A corporate ghost in the system. "Something's not right about this guy," Brennan grumbled, his thick fingers tapping at the patrol car's computer. "Too calm. And those shoes toes are $1,000 dress shoes." In the back seat, James overheard every word, his gaze fixed on the passing streets. The route they'd chosen was winding, deliberately long, likely a stall for dispatch to dig up more dirt. The radio crackled to life. "Unit to 147. Be advised the vehicle's registration is tied to a private corporate account. No further details without a warrant." The update only deepened their unease. Collins adjusted the mirror, locking eyes with James. "Sir, this would all go a lot easier if you just told us who you are." James's reply was polite, almost warm. "I appreciate your concern, officer, but as I mentioned, there are procedures to follow. I'm happy to go to the station." Brennan twisted in his seat, exasperation coloring his ruddy face. "Look, man, if you're some kind of undercover fed or something, just say it. We're all on the same side here." James's smile widened faintly. "I understand your frustration. Please, let's continue to the station." Brennan huffed, turning back with a shake of his head, while Collins radioed ahead. "Sarge, this isn't normal." When they rolled into the station lot, 3 more patrol cars idled under the fluorescent lights, their occupants drawn by the buzz of the strange arrest. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez waited at the entrance, arms crossed, her sharp eyes tracking James as he stepped out. Unlike her officers, she saw what they'd missaid: the impeccable posture, the way he scanned the room like a hawk, absorbing every detail. "I'm Sergeant Rodriguez," she said, her voice steady as they led him inside. "Would you like to tell me what's going on here?" James dipped his head respectfully. "I apologize for any confusion, Sergeant. I'm happy to cooperate with booking, but I need to make one phone call first. After that, everything will become clear." Her eyebrow arched. Most suspects demanded calls with desperation. James requested his with the calm of a man ordering coffee. "Process him first," she told her team. "Then he gets his call." The booking room buzzed with an odd energy. James's fingerprints triggered an immediate system lockout, some high-level clearance blocking access. His belongings offered no answers: the sleek phone, the fine wallet devoid of ID, and that cryptic card with its embedded chip. "Empty your pockets completely," Collins demanded. Still bristling, James reached into his jacket and produced a single white business card, handing it to Rodriguez. "This is the number I'll need to call." She studied ITA Washington, D.C. area code, nothing else. No name, no title, just stark simplicity. Book him for obstruction and resisting identification, she decided. Slipping the card into her pocket, "We'll sort this out after." As they escorted him to a holding cell, James's calm held firm. "Sergeant," he called back, his voice carrying a quiet urgency. "That phone call will need to happen within the next 30 minutes. After that, things might become complicated." In that moment, the weight of justice hung heavy over the senior fragile balance between authority and accountability. James's restraint spoke of a deeper truth, one that mocked the officer's hasty assumptions. Power, when wielded without scrutiny, could blind even the well-intentioned, and the consequences of that blindness were about to unravel in ways they couldn't yet fathom. The air in the precinct felt thick with tension as Sergeant Maria Rodriguez leaned forward in her chair, her sharp brown eyes narrowing at the faint tremor in Officer Brennan's voice. Something about the way he recounted the traffic stop gnawed at her, something subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it tugged at the instinct she'd honed over 18 years on the force. She wasn't a rookie anymore. She'd seen too many late-night arrests, too many excuses, to let this slip by unnoticed. Her gut churned, whispering that this wasn't just another petty bust gone sideways. "Collins." "Brennan," she barked, her voice cutting through the hum of the station like a blade. "Get in my office now. I want every single detail of that stop again, step by step." Her tone left no room for hesitation, and as the two officers shuffled toward her door, she caught a fleeting glimpse of the suspect. James Thompson, being escorted away in cuffs, his movements were calm, deliberate to calm. She could have sworn she saw him tilt his wrist, glance at his watch, and give the faintest nod, as if he were a conductor ensuring his orchestra hit every note on cue. Inside her cluttered office, Rodriguez sank into her worn leather chair, the faint scent of stale coffee lingering in the air. Her desk was a battlefield of paperwork, but her attention locked onto a single object, a sleek, enigmatic business card James had left behind. The embossed D.C. area code gleamed under the fluorescent light, taunting her with its mystery. Through the smudged glass of her window, she watched him in the holding cell, a lone figure sitting with his hands neatly folded, his posture eerily composed. He didn't fidget or pace like most detainees. He looked like a man awaiting a boardroom meeting, not a criminal charge. "Run it through one more time," she ordered, her voice steady but laced with an edge of unease. Officers Collins and Brennan stood before her, their boots scuffing the linoleum floor as they shifted uncomfortably. The more they stumbled through their explanations, dim streetlights, the tinted windows, the way James had hesitated before handing over his id, more their words felt like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit. Collins rubbed the back of his neck, his brow furrowing. "Ma'am, I think we should call that number on the card. Something about this guy, it's off, way off." Before Rodriguez could respond, a sharp rap on her door jolted her upright. The night desk officer, a weary kid named Torres, stood there clutching a fax, his face pale. "Sergeant, you need to see this right now." She snatched the paper, her eyes racing over the text. Each word hit like a punch, widening her gaze until she slammed the page down. "Get the captain on the line," she snapped. "Now." Across the station, in the dim glow of the holding cell, James Thompson sat unbothered by the chaos brewing around him. The flickering bulb overhead cast shadows across his angular face, but his faint smile betrayed no hint of worry. Officers darted past, their footsteps quickening, their whispers growing hushed and urgent. They avoided his gaze, as if sensing he was no ordinary prisoner. He'd orchestrated this moment, and it was unfolding with the precision of a Swiss watch. A young officer, barely out of the academy, approached the bars, his voice tentative. "Sir, would you like to make your phone call now?" James rose smoothly, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve. He glanced at his watch again, the silver glinting in the low light. "Actually," he said, his tone cool and measured, "that won't be necessary. In about 2 minutes, your captain should come storming through that door." The officer blinked, bewildered, but before he could process the words, The station's front entrance burst open with a gust of night air. Captain William Hayes barreled in, his face flushed crimson. His golf shirt wrinkled from a frantic drive straight from the 9th hole. "Open the cell," he roared, his voice hoarse with urgency. The young officer fumbled with the keys, hands trembling as the lock clicked free. "Captain Hayes," James greeted, stepping out with the ease of a man meeting a colleague for drinks, not emerging from a jail cell. "I'd apologize for dragging you out this late, but I suspect you'll understand soon enough." Rodriguez stormed up, flanked by Collins and Brennan, her patience fraying. "Would someone please tell me what the hell is going on?" she demanded, her voice a mix of fury and confusion. Before Hayes could muster a reply, the station doors swung open again, admitting a tall woman in a tailored suit, her heels clicking with authority against the tiled floor. Two men in dark suits trailed her, earpieces glinting like silent sentinels. "I'm Sarah Martinez, Chief of Staff for the Police Commissioner's office," she declared, her gaze sweeping the room before settling on James. "Sir, are you all right?" James adjusted his jacket, unruffled. "I'm fine, Sarah." Everything played out precisely as planned. Hayes looked ready to collapse, sweat beading on his forehead as he turned to Collins and Brennan, his voice cracking. "You two are you just arrested, Doctor?" James Thompson Marshall, the new police commissioner from D.C. The station fell silent, the weight of the revelation pressing down like a physical force. Collins froze, his jaw slack, while Brennan's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles whitening. Rodriguez shut her eyes, exhaling slowly as the pieces snapped into place. But James wasn't finished. His voice, now resonant with quiet authority, filled the void. "Actually, they did exactly what I intended." He turned to the officers, his dark eyes piercing. 3 weeks ago, my office received a flood of complaints once about racial profiling in this district's traffic stops. Rather than bury it in bureaucracy, I decided to experience it firsthand. Sarah Martinez stepped forward, snapping open her briefcase with a crisp click. "We've been monitoring everything," she said, her tone clipped and professional. Dr. Thompson Marshall's car was rigged with cameras front, back, interior. His phone recorded every word. "The registration you questioned, Marshall Industrieshi's private consulting firm. And that ID you couldn't see, his commissioner's badge." She paused, letting the truth sink in. "Tonight was a controlled test of how this precinct handles a black suspect. Who doesn't bow to profiling?" Hayes wiped his brow, stammering, "Dr. Thompson Marshall, I assure you." James cut him off, his voice firm but not harsh. "Save it for tomorrow, Captain. I'll be here at 9 a.m. sharp. We've got reforms to discuss, long overdue ones." He shifted his gaze to Collins and Brennan, who looked like they'd rather vanish into the floor. "You'll both be there too. This wasn't about punishment, it was a lesson. The real work starts tomorrow." As he turned to leave, flanked by his staff, he paused at the threshold. "Sergeant Rodriguez," he called back, "those instincts of yours telling you to make that call, sharp. You've earned a seat at the table tomorrow." The black SUV waiting outside hummed to life, and James slid into the back seat, leaving the officers staring after him in stunned silence. The night's events would echo through their careers, a routine stop twisted into a reckoning they'd never forget. By morning, Pine Grove Station buzzed with a nervous energy that crackled like static. Collins and Brennan arrived an hour early, their uniforms pressed to perfection, their boots polished to a mirror sheen. They sat in the break room, coffee cups untouched before them, the bitter aroma mingling with their unease. Brennan forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow. "Told my wife last night she couldn't stop cackling. Said it's what I get for jumping the gun." Collins stared into his mug, his reflection distorted in the dark liquid. "You think we're done for?" "Badges gone." Before Brennan could answer, Rodriguez swept in, her face etched with exhaustion, but her uniform pristine, her resolve unshaken. "Break's over," she said curtly. "Conference room now." They trailed her into the precinct's largest meeting space, where Captain Hayes fumbled with a projector, his hands trembling as he wrestled with tangled cables. "Commissioner's office sent files this morning," Rodriguez said, dropping thick folders onto the table with a thud. "Read them before he gets here." The officers cracked open the packets, their eyes scanning page after page of damning data traffic stops over the past 6 months. Statistics glaring in black and white. Black drivers were pulled over 3 times more often than white drivers in identical zones. Collins flipped a page, his voice low. I don't get it. We were just doing our jobs following the book. Rodriguez shot him a look but said nothing. The front desk officer appeared in the doorway, breathless. They're here. Dr. James Thompson Marshall strode in, a stark contrast to the disheveled figure they'd cuffed the night before. His dark blue suit hugged his frame, the gold commissioner's badge glinting on his lapel. His presence commanding the room without effort. Sarah Martinez and 3 aides followed, laden with laptops and files. Good morning, James said, his voice a smooth blend of calm and steel. I trust you've reviewed the initial data. Hayes lurched to his feet, nearly knocking over his chair. Yes, sir, Thompson Marshall. About last night, James raised a hand, silencing him. Before we dissect yesterday, I want you to see this. He nodded to Sarah, who plugged in her laptop, the projector whirred to life, casting footage from James's car onto the screen. Collins and Brennan watched themselves approach, hands hovering near holsters, voices clipped and tense. Overlays popped up response times, behavioral analysis. Protocol breaches flagged in red. In the past year, James began, 17 complaints of racial profiling hit this precinct, all dismissed for lack of evidence. That ends today. Collins raised a shaky hand, his voice faltering. Sir, with respect, you were acting suspicious. Any cop would have. James cut in, his tone soft but unyielding. Would they? He clicked to another clip. Same officers, same street, a white driver the week prior. Their posture was relaxed, hands loose, tone almost jovial. The contrast hung heavy in the air. Brennan stared at his lap, cheeks burning, while Collins's face drained of color. I'm not here to point fingers, James said, his voice softening. I'm here because this precinct can be better, a blueprint for change. That's why I picked it for my first undercover op as commissioner. Sarah handed out more folders. Crisp and weighty. New training, she announced. 6 months be his recognition, community outreach every officer's in. Rodriguez spoke up, her tone steady. Sir, why let us arrest you? You could have flashed that badge anytime. James smiled faintly. Because real lessons don't come from shortcuts. They come from facing the consequences of power misused and learning how to wield it justly. The room settled into a reflective hush, the weight of his words sinking deep. Justice wasn't just a badge or a gavel, it was a mirror, and they'd all been forced to look into it. For Rodriguez, it was a call to trust her instincts. For Collins and Brennan, a chance to unlearn and rebuild. For Hayes, a reckoning with the system he'd let slide. As James laid out the path ahead, the lesson crystallized. Power unchecked breeds injustice, but power tempered by accountability could light the way forward. The precinct would never be the same, and maybe, just maybe, that was the point. The dawn broke over the city with a soft golden hue, casting long shadows across the precinct as officers shuffled into the meeting room, their boots scuffing against the worn linoleum floor. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Captain Hayes stood at the front, his broad shoulders squared, his jaw tight with the weight of what he was about to say. Every officer in that room had lived through something extraordinary the night Beforian experience that stripped away the sterile lessons of reports and training videos, plunging them into the raw, chaotic reality that so many citizens face daily. It wasn't just a routine traffic stop. It was a mirror held up to their deepest instincts, reflecting the confusion and assumptions they didn't even know they carried. Officer Collins leaned against the wall near the window, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his hazel eyes tracing the slow crawl of morning traffic outside. The honks and engine rumbles barely registered as his mind replayed the night's events, every word, every glance, every heartbeat of doubt. Beside him, Officer Brennan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the table. The body camera footage from their patrol was about to become more than just a record. It was being immortalized as a cornerstone of the precinct's new training program. Not because they had failed, Captain Hayes assured them, his voice gravelly yet steady, but because their actions laid bare the subtle, insidious threads of unconscious bias that could twist a split-second decision into something far more consequential. Hayes cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the quiet room, and glanced at James Thompson Marshall, the precinct's enigmatic new figurehead. The media could spin this into a disaster for the department, Hayes warned, his brow furrowing as he imagined the headliness clickbait accusations of brutality or incompetence. James, standing tall in his crisp suit, met the captain's gaze with calm resolve. "They won't hear a word from my office," he replied, his tone smooth but firm. "This isn't about dragging anyone through the mud. It's about turning a page, starting a real shift in how we operate. Today, this precinct steps into something new. The only question is whether you're all ready to step with it." His words hung in the air, heavy with promise and challenge. The officers exchanged glances, some wary, some intrigued, all feeling the gravity of the moment settle into their bones. What began as a mundane patrol had spiraled into a reckoning, a revolution, in policing with them at its heart. 3 days later, the county courthouse hummed with an electric tension, its marble halls alive with the shuffle of polished shoes and the murmur of urgent whispers. Officers Collins and Brennan sat side by side on a hard wooden bench outside courtroom 3, their dress uniforms stiff and pristine, though the starch couldn't mask the unease radiating from them. Collins tugged at his collar, his throat dry as he watched a parade of unfamiliar faces stream past city council members in tailored suits, police brass with gleaming badges, reporters clutching notepads and darting glances like hawks. "Something's off," Brennan muttered, leaning closer, his voice barely audible over the courthouse din. "You see all these big shots. This isn't just about us." Collins nodded, his stomach twisting. He'd noticed the same thing. The air felt charged, like the prelude to a storm. Sergeant Rodriguez approached them, her strides purposeful, her dark eyes sharp with authority. She was a veteran, her presence commanding respect, but today her face carried an unusual solemnity. "Hearings in 20 minutes, she said, her tone clipped yet reassuring. "Stick to what we went over, just the truth, every detail from that night. Nothing more, nothing less." She rested a hand briefly on Brennan's shoulder, a rare gesture of warmth, before turning away. Inside the courtroom, Judge Laura Martinez presided from her bench, her stern features softened only by the faintest lines of fatigue. Known for her ironclad rulings and impatience with theatrics, she flipped through a stack of papers, her gaze flicking occasionally to her phone as if anticipating a signal. The room buzzed with anticipation, every seat meticulously arranged by Sarah Martinez, James's chief of staff, who moved through the chaos with the precision of a conductor. She directed dignitaries and observers alike, her tablet glowing as she checked names and positions, ensuring the stage was set for what was to come. As the double doors swung open, a hush fell over the crowd. The mayor and police chief claimed the front row, their expressions unreadable, while community leaders and civil rights advocates filled the seats behind them, their eyes alight with purpose. The press, relegated to the back, grumbled under the strict ban on phones and cameras, their pencils poised nonetheless. Collins and Brennan were ushered to seats near the judge's bench, their pulses quickening as they spotted Captain Hayes and other senior officers. In a cordoned-off section to their right, "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed, and the room stood as one, the rustle of fabric and creak of chairs punctuating the silence. Judge Martinez adjusted her glasses, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Before we proceed, let it be clear, this is no ordinary hearing. What unfolds here today will ripple through law enforcement practices across the state, setting a standard for years to come." The doors parted again, and James Thompson Marshall stepped into the light, not in the polished suit they'd expected, but in the same worn sweater and slacks from the night of his arrest. A collective breath caught in the room as he walked forward, his stride steady, his presence magnetic. "Dr. Thompson Marshall," Judge Martinez said, a trace of admiration softening her usual steel. "Are you prepared to proceed?" James inclined his head, his deep voice resonating with quiet strength. "Yes, Your Honor. But first, I want to express my gratitude to everyone here for joining what may be the most significant police training exercise this city has ever witnessed." A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. Collins shot Brennan a bewildered glance. "Training exercise?" Judge Martinez raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. Let the record reflect that this court has been convened not for a criminal proceeding, but as part of an authorized training program, spearheaded by Police Commissioner Dr. James Thompson Marshall. Sarah stepped forward, her heels clicking against the floor, her voice clear and commanding. 3 days ago, Officers Collins and Brennan were unwitting participants in a meticulously crafted scenario, designed to unearth the unconscious biases that shape police interactions. Today, we'll dissect that night step by step with insights from legal scholars, civil rights leaders, and law enforcement experts. The officers' jaws dropped as massive screens flared to life, displaying their body camera footage in vivid detail. James took center stage, his demeanor shifting from unassuming detainee to the authoritative commissioner. They now recognized what these officers didn't know, he said, his gaze sweeping the room, was that their every move was tracked by multiple agencies. Every choice, every word, every flinch, it was all captured, not to condemn, but to illuminate. Judge Martinez leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. Dr. Thompson Marshall, you put yourself in considerable danger. Was such an extreme measure truly necessary? James turned to Collins and Brennan, his eyes locking with theirs. Real change demands real stakes. Your Honor, we're not here to scapegoat anyone. We're here to confront the biases buried deep within our systems, and to forge a path forward together. The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. What had seemed a simple traffic stop was now poised to redefine policing itself. With Collins and Brennan's patrol at its core, the screens flickered again, revealing multi-angle footage of James's arrest officers' cautious approach, the tension in their postures, the subtle escalation of a routine encounter. But this time, new data overlaid the images, thermal scans and heart rate monitors tracking both James and the officers. Look closely, James said, gesturing to the display. This is fear mine, yes, but there's two. Fear born from assumptions we don't even realize we're making until it's too late. Sarah wielded a laser pointer, highlighting the officers' spiking pulses the moment they registered James's race. See their hands inch toward their holsters, she noted. No threat, no provocation, just instinct. Collins squirmed, heat rising to his face, but James raised a hand. Don't feel targeted. Officers, your reactions were textbook. That's precisely why this matters. Judge Martinez fixed James with a piercing stare. Explain your role in this, Commissioner. James straightened, his voice steady. 3 months ago, I became the D.C. Metropolitan Police Commissioner. But before I took the job, I insisted on one condition. I'd go undercover in cities across the country, experiencing firsthand how officers engage with minority civilians. I hold a Ph.D. in criminal justice and psychology, and I've studied police community dynamics for 2 decades. But no amount of data can rival the truth of lived experience. The mayor shifted uncomfortably. The police chief's face flushed crimson, but James pressed on. That night, I sat in that car to feel what so many others feel. These officers followed protocol, nothing wrong by the book. And that's the flaw we must fix. The screens shifted to a stark comparison. James's stop alongside footage of white drivers from the same week. With the latter, officers strolled up casually, hands loose, voices warm, even chuckling at odd explanations. With James, a black man in a luxury cart, air crackled with suspicion from the outset. Sarah handed out thick dossiers, her movements brisk. These are findings from 12 other cities. She said, the pattern holds everywhere. Judge Martinez pored over her copy, then looked up. And your solution, Commissioner? James's face broke into a rare smile. That's why we're here. For the next 8 hours, this courtroom becomes a training ground. We'll unpack every moment of that stop together with voices from officers, activists, lawyers, and leaders. Justice isn't just about punishment, it's about understanding. And when power is misused, even unintentionally, the consequences echo far beyond one night. This is our chance to learn and to change. On a crisp morning in the bustling courtroom, the air thrummed with anticipation. Officers Collins and Brennan sat stiffly, their uniforms pristine, yet their minds uneasy, as if they were perched on the edge of a cliff. Commissioner James Thompson Marshall's voice cut through the hum like a steady blade, calm yet commanding. "Officers, rest assured, you're not facing judgment today," he said, his eyes locking onto theirs with an intensity that carried both reassurance and purpose. "You're about to play a vital role in something greater, a solution that will ripple out to thousands of officers nationwide, reshaping how we serve." At those words, the tightness gripping Collins' shoulders softened, a quiet exhale escaping him, while Brennan's jaw unclenched, his gaze flickering with cautious relief. From her seat near the bench, Sergeant Rodriguez offered them a nod, her dark eyes warm with encouragement, as if she could already see the path unfolding before them. James turned to Judge Martinez, her stern yet thoughtful presence anchoring the room. "Your Honor, with your permission, I'd like to launch the training session right here," he said, his tone respectful but firm. "And I want to begin by acknowledging Officers Collins and Brennan. They didn't know it at the time, but their actions have given us a priceless gift, a cornerstone for reforming law enforcement." The judge surveyed the packed courtroom, rows of fidgeting officers, wide-eyed officials caught off guard, community leaders leaning forward with keen interest, and reporters scribbling furiously. She understood now why James had orchestrated this moment in her domain, where justice wasn't just a concept, but a living force. The weight of the law hung in the air, amplifying the stakes. "Commissioner Thompson Marshall," she declared, her voice ringing with authority, "you have the full backing of this court. Proceed." As James launched into his presentation, Collins and Brennan exchanged a fleeting glance. Just weeks ago, they'd been on a routine patrol, pulling over a car in the dim glow of streetlights, an encounter they'd thought trivial. Now, they sat at the heart of a movement that could redefine policing for generations. Collins felt a tremor of disbelief ripple through him. He'd always seen himself as a cog in the machine, not a catalyst for change. Brennan, meanwhile, wrestled with a mix of pride and unease, pride that their misstep might matter, unease at being thrust into the spotlight. Yet, as James spoke, outlining a vision of accountability and growth, something shifted. They weren't just pawns in this. They were ready to learn, to evolve. A month later, the Pine Grove Police Station buzzed with a new energy. The once drab walls now bore vibrant training posters, their bold slogans urging reflection and connection. The break room, once a cluttered nook of chipped mugs and stale coffee, had transformed into a welcoming community hub, its tables surrounded by mismatched chairs where officers and residents could sit as equals. But the real transformation simmered beneath the surface, in the hearts of the officers themselves. Officer Collins hunched over his desk, the faint glow of his computer screen illuminating his furrowed brow. He replayed his body camera footage from the previous day's traffic stops, a ritual now etched into the station's routine. Each frame felt like a mirror, reflecting not just his actions, but his instincts. He paused the video, his breath catching as he noticed his hand that once twitched toward his holster, at every shadow resting calmly by his side. Progress, he thought, a flicker of pride warming his chest. Sergeant Rodriguez paused by his desk, her uniform crisp, but her demeanor softened by her new role as head of community relations, a position born from James' vision. "You're getting the hang of it, aren't you?" she said, her voice carrying a quiet strength. Collins leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "It's strange," he admitted, his tone tinged with wonder. "I never realized how much I did without thinking, how many habits I didn't even question until I started watching myself every day." Rodriguez smiled, her gaze drifting to the footage still frozen on the screen. She remembered Collins from months ago, brash, quick to assume, a man shaped by years of unspoken routines. Now, she saw a spark of introspection in him, a willingness to unlearn. Down the hall, Officer Brennan stood before a room of fresh-faced recruits, their notebooks open, their eyes wide with curiosity. The screen behind him flickered to life, replaying the now infamous traffic stop that had set all this in motion. He pointed to his own figure in the grainy footage, his stance rigid, his shoulders squared like a soldier braced for battle. "See that?" he said, his voice steady but laced with a raw honesty. "That's what we call a threat stance. I didn't even know I was doing it back then." The recruits scribbled furiously, hanging on his every word. Brennan felt a flush of purpose. Once, this video had been a source of shame, a moment he'd wanted to bury. Now, it was his tool, a lesson carved from his own flaws. Pine Grove had become a beacon, drawing officers from across the country eager to study its methods. Their transfer requests piling up on Captain Hayes' desk. In the station's new community space, James sat cross-legged on a folding chair, surrounded by residents whose voices wove a tapestry of hope and lingering pain. He visited every 2 weeks, his notepad worn from use, his pen flying as he listened. An elderly black man, his hands gnarled from years of labor, spoke up, his voice trembling but firm. "Last week, I got pulled over broken taillight, but it wasn't like before." The officer was polite, explained it all step by step, even pointed me to a repair shop nearby. James' pen paused, his eyes meeting the man's, and the officer's name. He asked gently. "Collins," the man replied, pulling a crumpled business card from his pocket. "Told me to call him if the shop gave me trouble." James nodded, a quiet satisfaction settling over him. Collins, he thought, proof that change wasn't just a policy but a shift in spirit. Later, in Captain Hayes' office, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh coffee. The captain had changed too. His desk, once angled toward the window as if guarding his solitude, now faced the door, an invitation to anyone who knocked. He slid a stack of papers toward James, his weathered face breaking into a rare grin. "The numbers don't lie," Hayes said, tapping the stats. "Complaints down 60%, trust ratings soaring. And here's the kicker, arrests for serious crimes are up because people actually want to help us now." James leaned forward, his eyes tracing the figures and the officers. He asked. Hayes' grin widened. "See for yourself." He gestured to the break room window, where Collins and Brennan sat with 2 community leaders, their laughter spilling into the hall. Forks clinked against plates, voices overlapped an easy banter scene unthinkable just weeks ago. Commissioner Sarah Martinez approached, her tablet glowing with updates. "The governor's office called," she said, her tone brisk but excited. "They want our training program statewide. And CNN's asking for an interview about the Pine Grove model." James glanced back at the break room, his mind turning. "Tell them yes to the interview," he said, "but not just me. Collins and Brennan need to be there. This isn't my story alone, it's theirs." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Collins caught Brennan in the parking lot. "Remember that night, partner?" he said, his voice soft with memory. Brennan chuckled. "Kicking at a pebble. How could I forget? We thought we were just nabbing some shady guy. Turns out we stumbled into history." Collins grinned, glancing back at the station's new sign, Pine Grove Police Department, where community and law enforcement work as one. Below it, in smaller letters, was the date of that fateful stop night they'd thought they held the reins, only to learn they'd been the ones tested. "We failed that test," Collins mused, "but failing gave us a shot to fix things." 6 months later, the city park glowed under a cloudless sky, its grassy expanse packed with hundreds of onlookers. Officers in dress blues mingled with families, reporters, and police chiefs from distant states, all drawn to Pine Grove's improbable rise. At the podium, James stood tall, flanked by Collins and Brennan, their new badges glinting community relations training officers. Their story had become a legend, a testament to what justice could forge when power bowed to accountability. 6 months ago, James began, his voice rolling across the hushed crowd. A simple traffic stop didn't just change use, it reshaped what policing can be. Today, we celebrate not just our victories, but the lessons they've taught us. Behind him, a screen flared with stats, complaints down 75%, trust up 80%, crime prevention surging thanks to a community no longer afraid to reach out. Collins stepped forward, his hands steady, his once anxious eyes now clear. "I thought I had it all figured out," he said, his voice raw with truth. "I was wrong. Real policing isn't about flexing muscle, it's about listening, understanding." He held up his phone, showing an app the department had built, a tool to spot bias in his daily work. "Every morning, I watch my footage, not for trouble, but for chances to be better." The crowd leaned in, moved by his candor. Then Brennan took the mic, his posture relaxed yet resolute. "Last week, I stopped a young black guy in a fancy car. 6 months ago, I'd have sized him up as trouble. This time, I saw myself in that old video and chose different. Turns out, he was a doctor racing to save a life. I didn't hassle him, escorted him to the hospital. Applause erupted, a wave of sound that seemed to lift him higher. Sarah Martinez followed, her data painting a picture of a movement spreading like wildfire. 25 departments nationwide, now trained in Pine Grove's ways, with more clamoring to join. But James reclaimed the podium, his voice softening. The deepest change isn't in our rules or numbers, it's in us. He beckoned Collins and Brennan to his side, unveiling two plaques, one for the station, etching their story into its walls, the other, a new oath crafted by officers and residents alike, promising respect and equality. This oath, James said, will bind every officer who joins using every year. We'll renew it, a reminder that justice isn't static, it grows with us. As the ceremony faded into chatter and sunlight, the lesson lingered. Power unchecked breeds division, but power humbled by consequence can heal. Collins, Brennan, Rodriguez, Hazel had glimpsed their own flaws in that crucible of a traffic stop, and in facing them, they'd built something enduring. Pine Grove stood not just as a model, but as a mirror, reflecting what law enforcement could become when it dared to learn. In the heart of Pine Grove, a vibrant community pulsed with newfound unity as the golden hues of late afternoon bathed the park, where a remarkable ceremony unfolded. Sergeant Rodriguez sat among a cluster of community leaders, her posture relaxed yet proud, her dark eyes gleaming with a quiet joy she hadn't felt in years. These people, once distant faces in a crowd, had become her confidants, her allies, friends forged through months of tough conversations and shared dreams. She adjusted the crisp collar of her uniform, her fingers brushing the badge that now bore the station's new motto, protect, serve, understand. To her, those words weren't just a slogan. They were a promise etched into her soul after years of witnessing both the best and worst of humanity. Nearby, Captain Hayes stood tall, his chest swelling with a fatherly pride as he surveyed the scene. His salt and pepper hair caught the sunlight, and his weathered face softened into a rare smile. The station he'd commanded for over 2 decades had just been hailed as a national model for police reform, a recognition that felt like a personal triumph. He remembered the sleepless nights, the heated debates, and the moments of doubt when he'd wondered if change was even possible. Now, as applause rippled through the crowd, he felt a weight lift, replaced by a certainty that his legacy would endure. His gaze drifted to Judge Martinez, seated a few rows ahead, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. She was smiling to a warm, knowing smile that carried the memory of a day when her courtroom had transformed into something extraordinary, a classroom where lessons in accountability and compassion had taken root. The ceremony reached its crescendo with a moment no one in Pine Grove had ever seen before. Officers in their pressed blue uniforms stood shoulder to shoulder with community members' parents, shopkeepers, students, each raising their right hands in unison. Their voices blended into a powerful chorus as they recited a new oath, a pledge to safeguard their town together, ensuring it remained a place of fairness and safety for all. The air buzzed with emotion, hope, resolve, and a flicker of disbelief that they'd come this far. As the words faded, the crowd erupted into cheers, and people spilled into the park, mingling under the sprawling oaks. Officers Collins and Brennan found themselves surrounded by a group of curious visitors, officers from a neighboring city, their faces a mix of skepticism and intrigue. Collins, his lean frame relaxed, but his eyes sharp, leaned in to share what he'd learned. The hardest part, he said, his voice steady with conviction, is looking in the mirror and owning your own flossier biases. But once you do, it's like a fog lifts. You're not just a better cop, you're a better man. Brennan, shorter and stockier, nodded in agreement, his ruddy cheeks flushing with the weight of his own story. That traffic stop, he admitted, his tone softer, it could have been the end of Memmi's career. My reputation. Instead, it lit a fire. It gave me a purpose I didn't know I was missing. From the edge of the gathering, James watched it all unfold, a quiet satisfaction settling over him like a warm blanket. His undercover operation, a gamble that had kept him awake for months, paid off in ways he'd never dared to imagine. He'd gone in expecting resistance, maybe even failure, but Pine Grove had surprised him. It wasn't just a police department reborn, it was a beacon, a living testament to what could happen when people chose trust over fear. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grass, the station's new motto gleamed on badges, pinned to chests, and banners fluttering in the breeze. 3 words simple, yet profound, had turned a single moment of tension into a movement that rippled across the nation. Far from the park's celebration, the clock on Marcus Johnson's desk ticked past 11:30 p.m. The district attorney's office was a tomb of silence, its fluorescent lights long dimmed, leaving him alone with the hum of his thoughts and the rustle of papers. He was sliding into his worn leather briefcase. At 35, Marcus had carved out a reputation as one of the city's most relentless assistant district attorneys, a man whose meticulous nature and unyielding pursuit of justice had earned him both admiration and envy. He straightened his navy blue tie, its silk cool against his fingers, and caught his reflection in the dark window pane. Even after 14 grueling hours, his suit remained crisp, his posture unbowed. He stood tall, his broad shoulders squared, a quiet defiance in the way he carried himself. Marcus had learned young that as a black man in America, appearances weren't just a choice, they were armor. Every detail, from his polished shoes to the precise knot of his tie, was a shield against a world too quick to judge. The parking garage was a cavern of emptiness as he made his way to his car, his footsteps bouncing off the concrete walls in a hollow rhythm. His new BMW, a sleek, midnight blue beauty, glowed under the harsh fluorescent lights, a hard-earned prize from a corruption case he'd won last month. The leather seats sighed as he sank into them, the scent of luxury wrapping around him like a reward. He set his briefcase gently on the passenger seat, a ritual that grounded him, and started the engine. The city streets stretched out quiet and still as he drove through downtown, past shuttered storefronts and restaurants glowing faintly with their last embers of life. His mind drifted to the case consuming him, a sprawling drug trafficking ring that demanded every ounce of his focus. He'd recently moved to Cedar Heights, a leafy, affluent enclave on the city's north side. The decision to buy a house there had raised eyebrows, some amused, some hostile, but Marcus didn't care. Why shouldn't a successful black professional claim a spot in one of the city's finest neighborhoods? Breaking barriers wasn't just his job, it was his life. 2 blocks from home, as he turned onto Maple Drive, a sudden flash of blue and red pierced the night, dancing in his rearview mirror. His stomach tightened, but his face stayed calm. He glanced at the speedometer dead on the limit. Years of caution had drilled this into him, always careful, always precise, especially here, where he still felt the weight of unseen eyes sizing him up. Marcus flicked on the interior lights, placed his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, and waited, his breathing steady but his pulse quickening. In the side mirror, 2 figures emerged from the patrol car, their silhouettes sharp against the streetlights. One approached each side of his BMW, hands resting lightly on their holsters, a detail that sent a familiar chill down his spine. Well, what do we have here? The officer on the driver's seat, Sullivan. His nameplate read snapped on his flashlight, aiming it straight into Marcus's eyes despite the car's already bright interior. His voice carried a lazy drawl, edged with something harder. Little late for a joyride in this neighborhood, huh? Marcus kept his tone even, professional, a shield of its own. Good evening, officer. Is there a problem? On the passenger side, Officer Cooper circled slowly, his head tilting as he peered through the window with exaggerated curiosity. Nice car, he said, his voice dripping with insinuation, as if the BMW's gleaming curves couldn't possibly belong to the man inside. Real nice car. License and registration. Sullivan didn't bother responding to Marcus's question. His silence a power play Marcus recognized all too well. Of course, Marcus said, his calm unshaken. My registration's in the glove compartment, and my license is in my wallet. I'm going to reach for them now. He narrated each move, a habit born from too many nights like this, his hands deliberate as he opened the compartment. Cooper's grip tightened on his weapon, a subtle shift Marcus caught from the corner of his eye. Watch his hands, Sullivan, Cooper muttered, his tone sharp. Marcus's heart pounded, a drumbeat against his ribs, but his face betrayed nothing. He'd been here before too many times and the fear never dulled, only sharpened. He handed over the documents, his movements slow, precise. Sullivan snatched the license, holding it up with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, you know. He said, his skepticism thick, "We've had reports of suspicious vehicles around here. Lots of break-ins lately. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Marcus met his gaze. "No, sir. I live in this neighborhood 1240 to Maple Drive, just around the corner." The officers exchanged a glance, and Cooper let out a short, barking laugh. "Right? And I'm the President of the United States. Sir, step out of the vehicle." Sullivan's hand settled fully on his holster now, his command a line in the sand. Marcus knew this moment the pivot where everything could unravel. But then he saw it, the faint blink of body cameras on both officers. A spark of hope flared in his chest. Whatever happened next, it wouldn't vanish into the night. He stepped out, the cool air brushing his face, a distant dog barking into the stillness. Sullivan loomed closer to close while Cooper lingered by the passenger side, his hand still on his gun. "Spread your legs, hands on the car," Sullivan ordered, a smug edge to his voice that twisted Marcus's gut. The pat-down that followed was rougher than it needed to be, Sullivan's hands shoving and probing with a force that screamed disrespect. "So you say you live around here?" Cooper called, his sarcasm thick as he swung his flashlight over Marcus's tailored suit. "Cedar Heights. Huh, what exactly do you do that lets you afford this place?" Marcus's voice stayed steady, even as humiliation burned in his throat. "I'm a legal professional." Sullivan's laugh was harsh, ugly. "Legal professional? What, like a paralegal or something?" Cooper grinned, joining in. "Man probably just works in the mailroom." Their shared amusement stung. But Marcus's courtroom discipline held firm. Anger simmered beneath his skin, hot and righteous. But he swallowed it. He knew the Gemek knew that any crack in his composure would be their excuse. Instead, he memorized every word, every gesture, storing them like evidence. "My house is just around the corner," he said evenly. "If you'd like to follow me, I can prove my residency." "Oh, we'll get to that," Sullivan shot back, ending the pat-down with a shove that rocked Marcus forward. "But first, explain why your windows are tinted. Looks a little dark to me." Marcus's response was calm, factual. "The tint is within legal requirements, Officer Sullivan. I made sure of it when I bought the car." Cooper snorted, stepping closer. "Oh, so now you're an expert on vehicle codes? Listen to this guy, Sullivan. He knows all about legal requirements." Marcus caught the blink of Cooper's camera again and raised his voice slightly, ensuring clarity. "Officers, I understand you're doing your job, but I haven't committed any traffic violations. I've provided my license and registration, which prove my identity and vehicle ownership. Is there anything else you need?" Sullivan leaned in, his breath hot and close, his eyes narrowing. "You know what I need. I need you to drop the attitude. You think that fancy suit and nice car make you special, make you above the law." Marcus held his ground, his voice unwavering. "No, sir. I have great respect." He trailed off, not because he faltered, but because he knew this wasn't the end. Sullivan and Cooper didn't realize it yet, but they'd crossed paths with a man who understood justice not just as a concept, but as a weapon. Their abuse of power, their casual prejudice, had set something in motion. The cameras rolled. The night stretched on, and somewhere in the shadows of Cedar Heights, a reckoning waited. For Marcus, this wasn't just a stop, it was a lesson known they'd all learn in time. Power unchecked bred consequences, and justice, when wielded right, could cut deeper than any badge. The night air was thick with tension, a palpable weight pressing down on Marcus as he stood beside his sleek BMW, its glossy surface reflecting the flickering streetlights. His hands rested firmly on the car's hood, exactly where Officer Sullivan had ordered them to be, the cold metal biting into his palms. Suddenly, Officer Cooper's voice sliced through the stillness like a jagged blade. "For the law. That's why. Hands where I can see them," he barked, his tone sharp with accusation. Marcus flinched, his body tensing, though he hadn't shifted an inch. His heart thundered in his chest, a wild drumbeat echoing in his ears. He knew the truth, he all did. His hands hadn't strayed from their position, yet the air crackled with the unspoken threat of danger. A routine traffic stop teetering on the edge of something far darker. "He's reaching," Sullivan shouted, his voice a whip-crack of authority. Though his eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty, Marcus froze, his breath catching in his throat. The accusation hung heavy, a lie so blatant it almost felt absurd, but he understood the stakes. This was no game of chance, it was a deadly dance, one he'd seen play out too many times before. A single misstep, a perceived twitch, and everything could unravel into chaos. "I haven't moved my hands, Officer Cooper," Marcus said, his voice steady and deliberate, rising above the pounding of his pulse. He spoke loud enough for the body cameras to catch every syllable. His words a lifeline cast into the digital void. They're still exactly where Officer Sullivan placed them, inside. His mind raced, a storm of fear and calculation churning beneath his calm exterior. He could feel the sweat beating on his forehead, cooling in the night breeze, a silent testament to the terror he refused to show. Sullivan stepped closer, his boots scuffing against the asphalt, his face a mask of suspicion. "What's in your pocket?" he demanded, his tone dripping with menace. The question stung like a slap moments ago. Sullivan's hands had rifled through Marcus's pockets, patting him down with rough, impatient movements. "You just search me, officer," Marcus replied, his voice firm but measured, a tightrope walk between defiance and submission. "You know what's there, me wallet, my phone, my house keys." He could sense the trap tightening, the officers circling like wolves, scenting weakness. Cooper edged nearer, his broad frame looming, his lips curling into a sneer. "Getting smart with us now, huh? Think you're smarter than us?" The words were a taunt, a dare, and Marcus felt the weight of their intent pressing against his chest. Silence was his shield. He clamped his lips shut, knowing any response would be twisted into ammunition against him. The irony wasn't lost on him. Every barked order, every overreach, was a thread in the noose these officers were unwittingly tying around their own necks. Their body cameras whirred softly, capturing the scene in cold, unblinking detail, a record of their arrogance that would one day unravel them. Sullivan's sneer deepened, his hand darting to his belt. "Well, Mr. Legal Professional," he mocked, yanking the handcuffs free with a metallic clink. "Since you want to be difficult, maybe a night at the station will fix that attitude." The accusation came fast, disorderly conduct, resisting arrest before Marcus could process the absurdity. The cuffs snapped around his wrists. The steel bit into his skin, a sharp, icy sting that sent a jolt through his body. He kept his face a blank slate, but inside, his legal mind ignited, every gear turning with precision. Each word, each action, each frame of this encounter was now evidence, a gift these officers didn't realize they were handing him. As they shoved him toward the patrol car, Marcus felt his tailored suit jacket bunch awkwardly around his shoulders, the fabric pulling tight against his frame. The night air brushed against his damp forehead, a fleeting relief against the heat of his rising anger. Behind him, Cooper's voice crackled over the radio, calling for a tow truck to haul away his BMW. Marcus turned his head slightly, his voice cutting through the static. "You know, this is a clear violation of my civil rights," he said, loud and clear, ensuring the cameras caught it. Sullivan's response was immediate. His fingers tightened the cuffs, the metal digging deeper into Marcus's wrists. "Oh, look at that, Cooper," he sneered. "Our friend here's a civil rights expert now. Bet he picked that up from Law and Order." Cooper chuckled, stepping over to join them, Marcus's phone dangling in his hand. The screen glowed faintly, still recording a habit Marcus had honed through years of similar stops. "Trying to film us, huh? That's cute," Cooper taunted, waving the device like a trophy. "Recording police interactions is a protected right under the First Amendment," Marcus stated, his voice a calm anchor in the storm. Sullivan's grip tightened on his arm, spinning him roughly to face the car. "You think quoting laws makes you special, makes you better than us?" he spat, his breath hot against Marcus's ear. A car rolled by slowly, its headlights casting long shadows across the scene. Marcus caught the driver's eyes wide, curious, phone likely raised, more witnesses, more footage. "I'm simply stating facts, Officer Sullivan," he replied, his composure unshaken. "Facts that will matter very soon." Cooper's face twisted, his anger flaring. "Is that a threat?" "No, sir," Marcus said evenly, "just another fact." Sullivan yanked the patrol car door open with a grunt. "Get in, smart-ass. Let's see how many facts you know after a night in lockup." As Marcus ducked to enter, he paused, his sharp eyes catching a detailed loose tilt of Sullivan's body camera, dangling at an odd angle. "Officer Sullivan," he said, his tone almost polite, "your camera looks loose. You might want to adjust it for proper recording." The words landed like a pebble in a still pond. Both officers stiffened, a ripple of doubt flashing across their faces. Sullivan's hand flew to the device, his fingers fumbling as he confirmed the flaw. For a split second, his bravado faltered, and Marcus saw a crack in their armor. "Mind your own business and get in," Sullivan snapped, shoving Marcus's head down with a rough hand. The back seat was a cold, unforgiving cage, the vinyl seat creaking under his weight. Through the partition, Marcus heard the officers muttering about his Carhus BMW, his briefcase, the sensitive case files locked inside. "Officers," he called out, his voice steady, "there are confidential legal documents in my briefcase, protected under attorney-client privilege." Cooper twisted around in the passenger seat, his grin mocking. "What, you watch too many lawyer shows, boy. Maybe a night without your fancy car and briefcase will teach you some respect." Marcus let the taunt slide, his gaze drifting to the window. The tow truck rumbled into view, its yellow lights flashing like a predator's eyes. He noted every detail, dashboard clock glowing 11:50 p.m. The glint of Sullivan's badge number in the streetlight. The way his camera still hung askew as he barked orders at the tow driver. The ride to the station was a gauntlet of jeers and veiled threats. Sullivan's voice dripped with venom as he glanced at Marcus in the rearview mirror. "You know what I think? I think you're just another nobody who bought a nice car and a fancy suit to pretend you're something you're not. Probably borrowed it or stole it." Cooper's laugh was a harsh bark. "Yeah, borrowed it right off the lot." Marcus leaned back, the cuffs chafing his wrists, his mind a steel trap cataloging every insult, every procedural misstep. These officers thought they held the power, but with every word, they were forging the chains of their own undoinclear. Documented proof of racial profiling and misconduct. The station loomed ahead, its fluorescent lights buzzing like a swarm of angry bees. Sullivan and Cooper marched him through the doors, the worn linoleum squeaking under their boots. The booking area hummed with late-night house officers shuffling papers, a radio crackling faintly. Marcus's eyes darted around, taking in the faces, some curious, some indifferent. "All part of this machine. Look what we caught prowling around Cedar Heights," Sullivan announced, his voice booming to the booking sergeant, a heavy-set man with graying hair hunched over a computer. "Mr. Legal professional here thinks he's above the law." The sergeant barely glanced up, his fingers tapping lazily. "Charges, disorderly conduct, resisting arrest," Cooper said, shoving Marcus forward. "Found him acting suspicious in a high-end neighborhood." Marcus stood tall, silent, watching the Sergeant Williams, his nameplate red type with mechanical precision. Every detail mattered, names, times, witnesses. "Name?" Williams asked, his eyes finally lifting. Before Marcus could speak, Sullivan cut in with a laugh. "Says he's some kind of lawyer." A few nearby officers smirked, but others shifted uncomfortably. Sensing the mockery's edge, "Marcus Johnson," he said clearly, his tone unshaken. "I'd like to make my phone call." Cooper sneered. "Oh, you know your rights, do you? Probably got that from cop shows." Williams's fingers paused, his eyes narrowing at the screen. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, then unease. "Officers," he said carefully, "could I speak with you a moment?" Before he could finish, a voice thundered across the room. "What the hell is going on here?" Lieutenant Garcia strode in, his presence a sudden storm. His eyes locked on Marcus, widening with shock. "Mr. Johnson, what are you doing here?" Sullivan and Cooper faltered, their bravado crumbling as the room's energy shifted. "Good evening, Lieutenant Garcia," Marcus replied, his voice a calm beacon. Inside, he felt the tide turning. Justice, slow but relentless, was already in motion. These officers had no idea the reckoning they'd unleashed, a lesson in power's fragility and the consequences of its abuse. The air in Marcus Johnson's quiet neighborhood hung thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and the distant hum of a lawnmower as twilight settled over the tree-lined streets. He'd lived here for years, a place where he felt the comforting rhythm of Roughton walking his dog, waving to neighbors, sipping coffee on his porch. But that evening, as he stepped out of his sleek black BMW, something felt off. Two uniformed figures emerged from the shadows of a patrol car, parked just beyond the flickering streetlight of Fikers Sullivan and Cooper. Their boots crunched against the gravel as they approached, their faces etched with a mixture of boredom and unwarranted suspicion. "You're acting suspicious," Sullivan barked, his voice cutting through the stillness like a jagged blade. Marcus froze, his keys dangling in his hand, a ripple of disbelief coursing through him. Suspicious in his own neighborhood? Before he could fully process the absurdity, Cooper was behind him, his rough hands wrenching Marcus's arms back with a force that made his shoulders ache. The cold metal of handcuffs snapped around his wrists, biting into his skin with a sharpness that sent a jolt of anger surging through him. He tried to speak, to explain who he was, but Sullivan cut him off with a sneer. Resisting, that's gonna make this worse for you. Marcus's heart pounded not from fear, but from the sheer injustice of it all. These men, cloaked in the authority of their badges, had no idea who they'd just ensnared. As they shoved him toward the patrol car, his polished shoes scuffing against the pavement, he caught a glimpse of his impounded BMW's briefcase, stuffed with confidential case files. Locked inside, the precinct was a blur of fluorescent lights and stale coffee fumes when they hauled him in. Marcus stood tall despite the restraints, his mind racing as he cataloged every detail, the smug tilt of Sullivan's grin, the way Cooper avoided his gaze, the faint scratch of pen on paper as they scribbled their report. Then, a shadow loomed in the doorway. Lieutenant Garcia, a broad-shouldered man with a reputation for no-nonsense leadership. His dark eyes swept over the scene, narrowing as they landed on Marcus. The room seemed to shrink under the weight of his presence. "Uncuff him," Garcia ordered, his voice low but unyielding, like thunder rolling in the distance. Sullivan hesitated, his fingers twitching toward his belt. "Sir," he was resisting, he began, but Garcia's glare silenced him. "Uncuff him now," he repeated, each word a hammer strike. "That's Assistant District Attorney Johnson you've got there." The clatter of keys and the metallic click of the cuffs releasing echoed in the stunned silence that followed. Marcus rubbed his wrists, wincing at the raw, red welts left behind marks he mentally filed away as evidence, a silent promise of retribution. Sullivan and Cooper stood frozen, their earlier swagger dissolving into something pitiful. Garcia's tone shifted, softer now, laced with regret. "Mr. Johnson, my office, please." "Officers, you too." As they trudged down the dimly lit hall, Marcus felt the weight of whispers trailing behind him. Fragments of hushed voices floated through the air. The Ada prosecuted the Martinez case, each word stoking the fire in his chest. He wasn't just a man wronged, he was a symbol of the system they dared to misuse. Inside Garcia's cramped office, the door clicked shut with a finality that made Sullivan flinch. The lieutenant turned, his broad frame filling the space, his face a mask of controlled fury and embarrassment. "Mr. Johnson, I can't begin to," he started, but Marcus raised a hand, his movement deliberate. "Polite but firm. Lieutenant, with all due respect, let's save the formalities for later. Right now, I need my phone call. My car's been impounded, confidential files are inside." His voice was steady, but beneath it simmered a quiet rage, a storm held back by sheer will. Sullivan and Cooper stood stiff as statues, their eyes darting between Marcus and the floor. The bravado they'd wielded like a club had vanished, leaving them exposed, vulnerable. Marcus reached into his pocket, pulling out a crisp business card they'd ignored during their hasty search. He handed it to Garcia, his gaze unwavering. "I'll be filing a formal complaint, multiple actually. I trust the body camera footage will be preserved." Garcia nodded quickly, almost too quickly. "Of course, I'll personally ensure." Marcus cut him off, his tone smooth as glass. "Thank you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have calls to make." He turned to the officers, who seemed to shrink under the weight of his stare. "Sullivan, Cooper'll see you in court soon, but not the way you're used to." With that, he stepped out, leaving the room suffocating in its own tension. As he walked through the precinct, past the wide-eyed stares of desk clerks and patrolmen, a faint smile tugged at his lips. Justice wasn't just a concept he prosecuted, it was a force he'd wield, and it was already gathering momentum. The next morning, Marcus sat in his office at the district attorney's building, the city skyline sprawling beyond his window like a silent witness. His coffee sat untouched, steam curling into the air. As he stared at the personnel files of Sullivan and Cooper glowing on his computer screen, he'd swapped last night's rumpled suit for a crisp one, but the phantom sting of those cuffs still lingered around his wrists, a constant reminder of the line that had been crossed. A soft knock broke his focus. "Come in," he called, already sensing who it was. The door swung open, and District Attorney Sarah Martinez stepped inside, his mentor of 5 years, a woman whose sharp mind and sharper tongue had guided him through countless cases. Her face carried the same worry she'd poured into their midnight phone call, her dark eyes searching his. "Marcus, how are you holding up?" "I'm fine," he said, swiveling his screen toward her. "Did you know Sullivan's had 3 racial profiling complaints in the last 2 years? All dismissed lack of evidence." Sarah pulled up a chair, the legs scraping softly against the hardwood floor, and sat down, her posture tense but attentive. "Marcus, you don't have to take this on alone. We can assign another prosecutor." He shook his head, cutting her off. "No, this is personal. I've already started digging into every case where these 2 were key witnesses. Their credibility shot." He slid open a drawer, revealing a thick file bulging with notes and highlighted reports. Sarah's gaze flicked to the trash bin, empty coffee cups and take-out boxes piled high. "You've been here all night, haven't you?" "Couldn't sleep," he admitted, his voice softening for a moment before hardening again. He clicked open the body camera footage. Internal Affairs had rushed to him. "Watch this." Together, they leaned in. The grainy video painting a vivid picture of the arrest, Sullivan's snide remarks dripping with contempt, Cooper's unnecessary shoves, every violation of protocol captured in stark clarity. Sarah's expression darkened, her jaw tightening with each passing second. This as she began, but Marcus finished for her. Typical. But this time, they picked the wrong guy. He opened another file, his fingers moving with purpose. "I've found 5 similar incidents in Cedar Heights minority drivers, all dismissed because it was their word against the officers." Sarah leaned back, realization dawning in her eyes like the first light of morning. "You're going to use this to reopen those cases?" Marcus nodded, his resolve unshakable. "They're not just profiling, they're lying on reports. That taints every arrest, every testimony." He pulled up a draft motion, the text dense with legal precision. "I've already started this to review every conviction where their word tipped the scales." Sarah's brow furrowed. "The police union will fight you tooth and nail." Marcus replayed a clip of Sullivan adjusting his camera away during the search. "A blatant breach of policy, let them try. They don't have footage of their officers mocking a prosecutor." She studied him, seeing not just her deputy, but a man ignited by purpose. "What do you need from me?" Marcus slid a prepared document across the desk. "Official authorization to handle all cases involving Sullivan and Cooper, and your support when this gets messy, because it will." Sarah skimmed the paper, her pen hovering before she signed with a decisive stroke. "You know this could strain things with the department." Marcus gestured to the screen, where Cooper's mocking laugh echoed. "That relationship's broken anyway. Someone has to fix it." She handed back the signed form. "Just be careful. This could get personal." His eyes met hers, steady and fierce. "It already is. But I'll do it right, every detail perfect. When I'm done, these officers won't just face discipline, they'll be a lesson in why power can't be abused without consequence." As Sarah left, Marcus turned back to his screen, dozens of case files flickering before him, each a potential wound in the fabric of justice, each a chance to stitch it back together. His phone buzzed. The footage was secured, triple backed up. Another faint smile crossed his lips. Sullivan and Cooper had no clue what was coming, but they'd soon learn that justice wasn't just a word, it was a reckoning. 2 weeks later, the heavy wooden doors of courtroom 306 creaked open, and Officers Sullivan and Cooper strode in with the confidence of men who'd walked this path 100 times. The room buzzed with the familiar chaos of a weekday morning, lawyers shuffling papers, defendants whispering to anxious families, court officers standing like sentinels. The officers were there to testify in a routine drug possession case, the kind they breezed through monthly. "Easy in, easy out," Sullivan muttered to Cooper, adjusting his badge as they settled into their usual spot near the witness stand. "We'll grab lunch after." But Cooper frowned, his eyes scanning the gallery. Something's off. Was the brass here? Senior police officials lined the benches, their faces stern, their uniforms crisp. Sullivan shrugged. Probably some big case later. The gavel cracked, and Judge Thompson swept in, her robe billowing as she took her seat. "Good morning," she said, her voice crisp, her gaze sweeping the room. "Case to order for CR 789, People versus Richardson." The defense attorney rose, a familiar face. But the prosecutor's chair stayed empty. A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. "Where's Davis?" Cooper whispered, leaning toward Sullivan. "He's never late." Then, the doors at the back groaned open, and footsteps rang out slow, deliberate, commanding. The officers turned, casual at first, then froze. Marcus Johnson emerged, his charcoal gray suit impeccable, his leather briefcase the same one from his impounded car gleaming in his hand. He moved with the calm assurance of a predator closing in, his face a mask of professionalism as he set his files on the prosecutor's table. Sullivan's grip tightened on Cooper's arm. That's the guy we arrested," Cooper rasped, his voice a ghost of itself, their faces drained of color, their earlier strut reduced to a memory. Marcus glanced up, locking eyes with them. A small, curt nod was all he offered, a gesture that carried the weight of a guillotine before. He turned to the judge. "Good morning, Your Honor. Marcus Johnson for the people. Apologies if I'm a moment late." Judge Thompson's lips twitched. Almost a smile. "Not at all, Mr. Johnson." The courtroom held its breath, the air thick with the promise of something seismic. Sullivan and Cooper had walked in expecting routine. They'd stumbled into a reckoning instead on that would teach them, and everyone watching, that abusing power carried a price, and justice, when wielded by the right hands, was unrelenting. In the dimly lit courtroom, the air buzzed with tension as Judge Thompson leaned back in her high-backed chair, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly at the unexpected twist unfolding before her. "I must say, Mr. Johnson, I didn't expect to see you here today," she remarked, her voice carrying a mix of curiosity and faint surprise. "Wasn't David Davis supposed to handle this case?" Her fingers tapped lightly on the polished wood of her bench, betraying a flicker of impatience as she awaited an explanation. Marcus Johnson, standing tall and composed in his crisp suit, offered a faint, confident smile. "There's been a reassignment, Your Honor," he replied, his tone smooth as silk yet edged with purpose. "If I may approach to clarify," with a nod from the judge. He strode forward, his polished shoes clicking softly against the tiled floor. In the gallery, Officers Sullivan and Cooper sat stiffly, their postures rigid as if bracing for an unseen storm. Their eyes tracked Marcus's every move, unease rippling through them as he handed Judge Thompson a neat stack of documents. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a hushed murmur, too low for the officers to catch a single word. Sullivan's gut twisted sharply, a cold knot forming as he watched the judge's eyebrows arch upward while she scanned the pages. Her lips pursed, and after a long, weighted pause, she spoke. "I see. Very well, Mr. Johnson, you may proceed." Marcus returned to his table with measured steps, the room so silent that the sharp click of his briefcase latches echoed like gunfire. Sullivan flinched at the sound, his palms growing clammy, while Cooper's fingers trembled faintly against the armrest. Marcus drew out a thick stack of files, each one meticulously labeled with dates and case numbers that seemed to glare accusingly at the two officers. "Your Honor," he began, his voice ringing out clear and unshaken, cutting through the heavy atmosphere. "Before we dive into today's proceedings, the people must address a grave issue concerning the credibility of our witnesses." Sullivan's stomach plummeted further, a sickening lurch that left him dizzy, while Cooper's shallow breaths betrayed the panic creeping up his spine. Marcus turned, his gaze locking onto the officers with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. Officers Sullivan and Cooper, would you please step up to the witness stand? We have some pressing matters to discuss, matters tied to the night of January 16th and several other incidents that have recently surfaced. The officers rose on unsteady legs, their boots scuffing the floor as they shuffled forward. Every pair of eyes in the courtroom bore into them. Senior police officials in the gallery leaned forward, their stern faces carved from stone, while the defense attorney, a weary man with a perpetually furrowed brow, tilted his head in confusion. Though a spark of intrigue glinted in his eyes, Marcus lifted the top file from his stack, and Sullivan's heart stuttered as he glimpsed his own name scrawled across it in bold ink. Below it, in even larger letters, were the words "Pattern and Practice of Racial Profiling, Internal Affairs Investigation 2024 to 247. Let's begin with your activities in Cedar Heights," Marcus said, flipping the file open with a deliberate slowness that amplified the room's suffocating stillness. The officers sank into the witness box, their earlier bravado stripped away, leaving them exposed under the morning sunlight that streamed through the towering windows. Long shadows stretched across their ashen faces, accentuating the hollows beneath their eyes. "Officer Sullivan," Marcus continued, his tone calm yet piercing, "could you enlighten the court about your department's policy on body cameras?" Sullivan cleared his throat, the sound raspy and strained. "They're supposed to be on during all civilian interactions." He stammered and positioned to capture everything clearly. "Correct," Marcus nodded, stepping over to the courtroom's large display screen and switching it on with a flick of his wrist. "So let's take a look at what happened with your body camera 2 weeks ago." The footage flickered to life, grainy but damning, showing Sullivan's hand deliberately tilting the camera upward during a search, obscuring the scene. A murmur rippled through the gallery, disapproval etched into the faces of onlookers, as several shook their heads. In the back row, senior police officials scribbled furiously in their notebooks, their expressions darkening with each passing second. "Care to explain why you adjusted it, Officer Sullivan?" Marcus pressed, his voice steady but unrelenting. Sullivan shifted in his seat, the wooden chair creaking under him. "It was loose," he muttered, his eyes darting to the floor. "It was slipping." Marcus raised an eyebrow, retrieving another file with a flourish. "Interesting excuse. Because I've got records here of 5 other incidents in the past year where your camera was loose. During searches involving minority drivers in Cedar Heights." Cooper shot a nervous glance at his partner, his jaw tightening as their hastily assigned police union lawyer scribbled notes at a frantic pace, his pen scratching audibly against the paper. Marcus pivoted to Cooper, his focus unrelenting. "And you, Officer Cooper, in that same footage from January 16th, you made several comments about my presence in Cedar Heights being suspicious. Could you clarify what specific behaviors prompted that judgment?" Cooper's mouth opened, then closed, his Adam's apple bobbing as he struggled for words. "You were driving slowly," he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus held up another document, his movements fluid and precise. "The GPS data from your patrol car shows I was driving exactly at the speed limit." "Try again." The defense attorney, originally there for the drug case, leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed as he watched the drama unfold with growing fascination, his own case momentarily eclipsed by this unexpected unraveling. Judge Thompson remained stone-faced, her stern gaze fixed on the officers as she allowed Marcus to press forward. "Let's examine your arrest record in Cedar Heights," Marcus continued, placing a chart on the display. The numbers loomed large: 47 traffic stops in the past year, 43 involving minority drivers. "Would you care to explain that pattern?" he asked, his voice carrying a quiet, steely edge. The police union lawyer shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Objection, Your Honor. This is beyond the scope of today's case." Marcus didn't flinch, his response calm and measured. "Your Honor, these officers' credibility is central to every case they testify in, including this one. I have evidence here of 12 cases where their testimony secured convictions, and in each one, their body cameras conveniently malfunctioned or were misdirected at critical moments." Judge Thompson's eyes narrowed, her gavel resting untouched as she waved a hand. "Objection overruled." "Continue," Mr. Johnson. For the next hour, Marcus dismantled the officers foyed with surgical precision. He presented traffic stop data that painted a stark picture of bias, complaint records from citizens whose voices had been ignored, and body camera footage that captured fleeting glimpses of misconduct before being abruptly cut off. With each revelation, Sullivan and Cooper seemed to shrink further into themselves, Sullivan's broad shoulders hunching inward, Cooper's hands clenching into fists as if to hold himself together. "Officer Sullivan," Marcus said at last, lifting the final file. "Do you recall telling me that night that I'd learned some respect in jail? That I was pretending to be something I'm not?" Sullivan stared at the floor, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I apologize for that, sir." "I'm not here for apologies," Marcus shot back, his tone firm but not cruel. "I'm here for justice, and not just for myself, but for every person you've profiled, harassed, or falsely arrested." He turned to Judge Thompson, his stance unwavering. "Your Honor, based on this pattern of misconduct, the District Attorney's Office is moving to review all cases involving these officers. We're also filing formal complaints with Internal Affairs." In the gallery, the senior police officials rose abruptly, their faces grim as they gestured for their aides to follow them outside. The message was unmistakable. This was no longer a minor courtroom skirmish, it was a reckoning. Furthermore, Marcus pressed on, his voice gaining strength, "We'll be contacting every individual these officers arrested in Cedar Heights over the past 3 years. Their stories deserve to be heard." As he gathered his files, the full weight of the moment crashed down on Sullivan and Cooper. Their careers hung by a thread, their reputations teetered on the brink of ruin, and their future, since so certain, loomed as a vast, uncertain abyss. All because they'd targeted the wrong man on a cold January night. "Sometimes," Marcus said softly, almost to himself as he snapped his briefcase shut, "respect isn't taught through force or intimidation. Sometimes, it's the consequences that do the teaching." 3 months later, Marcus stood at a podium in the police department's cavernous conference room, the hum of anticipation filling the air. Behind him, a massive screen glowed with slides detailing new policies and training protocols. The room brimmed with officers, city officials, and community leaders, their faces a mix of hope, skepticism, and resolve. "Change doesn't come overnight," Marcus began, his eyes sweeping across the crowd. "But it has to start somewhere." In the back row, Sullivan and Cooper sat in civilian clothes, their badges surrendered to weeks after the courtroom showdown. Following a scathing Internal Affairs report, their resignations had been quiet, almost anticlimactic, but the ripples of their downfall were still spreading. Chief Roberts, a grizzled veteran with 30 years on the force, stepped up beside Marcus, his weathered face set with determination. The revelations about his officers had shaken him deeply, but he'd channeled that shock into action. "Thanks to Mr. Johnson's efforts," he said, his gravelly voice carrying across the room, "we've uncovered serious flaws in our department. More importantly, we've built solutions." Marcus clicked to the next slide, revealing updated statistics: 200 cases reviewed, 47 convictions overturned due to misconduct or tainted evidence. "This isn't just about 2 officers," he emphasized, his gaze steady. "It's about transforming the system." In the front row, Sarah Martinez, the newly minted district attorney, nodded approvingly. The courtroom incident had lit a fire under her, making police accountability her office's cornerstone mission. "Today," Marcus continued, "we're rolling out 3 major changes. First, every officer will complete enhanced bias training, crafted with input from community leaders like Reverend Jackson and Dr. Chin." He gestured to the 2 figures seated near Reverend Jackson, a soft-spoken man with a commanding presence, and Dr. Chin, a sociologist whose sharp intellect had shaped the program's rigor. Second, we're establishing an oversight committee with both law enforcement and civilian members to review all profiling complaints. And third, we're launching a mentorship program. Experienced prosecutors will guide patrol officers, ensuring they grasp the legal weight of their actions and the value of airtight evidence. Chief Roberts took the microphone, his tone earnest. "These changes aren't about punishment, they're about progress." As he spoke, Marcus caught the eye of a young officer in the audience, his uniform crisp and his expression eager. In that moment, Marcus saw a glimmer of hope, a chance that the lessons of justice and the bitter cost of power abused might take root, reshaping not just a department, but the lives it touched. The road ahead was long, but for the first time, it felt like they were moving forward. In the dimly lit auditorium, Lieutenant Garcia sat among the audience, his chest swelling with a quiet, unshakable pride. His eyes followed Marcus as he paced the stage, each word the man spoke resonating with a conviction that Garcia had long admired. Years ago, when Marcus had first proposed his sweeping reforms, Garcia hadn't hesitated to stand by him. He'd even taken the stand himself, his voice steady as he recounted the toxic culture that had festered within the department, a culture that had shielded officers like Sullivan and Cooper, letting their reckless actions slip through the cracks for far too long. Now, watching Marcus address the room, Garcia felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. This wasn't just about fixing a broken system. It was about justice, about ensuring that power, when wielded, didn't crush the very people it was meant to protect. Marcus's voice grew louder, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd like a blade. But the real shift, the one that matters most, is what's happening out there, in our neighborhoods. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. Since this incident shook us to our core, civilian complaints have plummeted by 30%. Trust, that fragile thread tying our communities to those sworn to serve them, is finally starting to mend. With a subtle click, he brought up his final slitty, a photograph of Cedar Heights at dusk, its streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. Every soul in this city, no matter the color of their skin, deserves to walk their own streets without fear. Every person deserves respect from the badge, not suspicion. And every officer, every single one, deserves the training and support to uphold that promise. His gaze swept the room, unwavering, as if daring anyone to challenge the truth he'd laid bare. As the presentation ended, the room buzzed with energy. People clustered together, their voices a mix of excitement and debate over the new policies Marcus had unveiled. Garcia lingered near the back, watching it all unfold, when a young black officer approached Marcus. She moved with a quiet confidence, her uniform crisp, her eyes bright with something that looked like gratitude. "Sir," she said, her voice trembling just slightly, "I just wanted to say thank you. What you've done, it's not just changing things for the people out there. It's making a difference for officers like me, too." Marcus's face softened, a rare smile breaking through the stern lines etched by years of fighting uphill battles. For a moment, he was back in his younger self's shoes, a fledgling prosecutor driven by a fire to right the wrongs he'd seen too often. "We're only getting started," he told her, his tone warm but resolute. "The road ahead is long, but at least now we're asking the right questions, shaping the right conversations." Later that evening, Marcus drove home to Cedar Heights, the familiar hum of his car's engine, a soothing contrast to the day's intensity. As he turned onto his street, he caught sight of a patrol car in his rearview mirror. Once, that sight would have tightened his chest, sent a jolt of unease coursing through him, a remnant of the night 3 months ago, when everything had unraveled. But tonight, there was no dread, no second-guessing. The officer behind the wheel, one of the first to complete the new training Marcus had fought for, raised a hand in a casual wave as their paths diverged. Marcus returned the gesture, a small but significant victory settling into his bones. Inside his house, he tugged at his tie, letting it fall loose as he crossed the living room. His gaze landed on a framed newspaper clipping on the wall, its bold headline a testament to the storm he'd weathered. "DAS Office launches comprehensive police reform after racial profiling incident." Beneath it, a smaller article detailed Sullivan and Cooper's resignations, their careers crumbling under the weight of their own abuse, a stark reminder that power unchecked could topple even those who thought themselves untouchable. His phone buzzed on the counter, pulling him from his thoughts. A message from Sarah lit up the screen. "Great presentation today. Ready to roll this out to the other precincts." Marcus's lips curved into another smile as he typed back, "One step at a time." "But yet this is just the start." He set the phone down and drifted to the window, peering out at the quiet street beyond. 3 months ago, this very view had been the backdrop to Coast Night. Sullivan and Cooper had crossed a line, their arrogance sparking the incident that had upended Marcus's life and set this all in motion. Now, the stillness outside felt almost sacred, a fragile peace born from the ashes of that turmoil. He leaned against the frame, letting the cool glass press against his palm, and thought about how the ugliest moments could sometimes birth the most profound change. What those two officers had intended as a flex of dominance had instead lit a fuse, one that burned through the rot in the system and forced it to reckon with itself. The system wasn't healed not by a long shot. Flaws still ran deep, jagged edges that would take years to smooth. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Marcus could sense a shift, a momentum carrying them forward instead of dragging them back. Out there, in the precincts and the neighborhoods, people were starting to believe that justice wasn't just a word, but a promise worth keeping. And as he stood there, the night stretching out before him, Marcus knew this was the lesson that mattered most when power was abused. It didn't just harm the powerless, it corroded everything. From the badge to the streets, it patrolled. But when that abuse was met with resolve, with a refusal to look away, it could spark something greater, a reckoning, a rebuilding, a chance to make things right.